Good evening, Canby. We are going to call to order the Joint Planning Commission City Council work session. If it's okay with my colleagues, we'll forego the formalities until the later meeting. Okay, at this time then I'm going to turn it over. We're going to talk about housing needs assessment and economic opportunity assessment. So Don Hardy, I'm going to turn it over to you at this point.
Thank you, President Hensley. I wanted to just briefly introduce our consultants tonight. They're going to be leading us through a PowerPoint for both housing and economic development, our economic opportunity assessment, and our housing needs analysis and housing production strategy work that's been done to date. I've got Steve Faust here to my right with 3J Consulting. He's doing the planning, leading the planning work for us on this effort. We have Todd Chase, who's with FCS Group, and they're doing the economic development portion of this. So without further ado, I'll give it over to Steve.
Good evening, councilors and commissioners. Thanks for having us back again tonight. Some of you have seen some of this information before, but we have updated information. We'll go a little more in depth tonight. I'm going to just give a brief introduction, and then Todd's going to do most of the talking tonight. If this.
Sorry, it's not turned on.
There we go.
Yep.
Okay. So as Don mentioned, we're going to start this evening with the economic opportunities analysis, going through the land need and objectives, and then we'll have some time for discussion on economic development, and then we'll shift to housing with a review of the housing needs and a real focus on the housing production strategies, and again, we'll then have some time for discussion. This is a graphic that we've been using to explain to folks kind of the overall process of where we've been in Canby and where we're headed. We hope to have the economic opportunities analysis and the housing production strategy adopted by the end of May. We also have kicked off officially the updates to the comprehensive plan and the transportation system plan. So we're just getting started there. And along with that process, we will be doing work on an urban growth boundary expansion, which is based both on the economic opportunities analysis and on the housing needs analysis. Previous rules indicated that, state rules said that we needed to adopt that housing needs analysis and urban growth boundary expansion at the same time. There's been some change in rules. We may consider adopting the housing needs analysis in advance of the urban growth boundary expansion. We won't go into that in detail tonight, but just know that we might do the HNA and the urban growth boundary expansion sequentially rather than at the same time. But we're still kind of working on the details of that. In terms of the economic opportunities analysis and the housing production strategy, here we are on March 1st with our joint work session. We recently had a public open house on January 24th, and just last week had our final Housing Advisory Committee meeting number 4 on February 22nd. Following this work session tonight, we'll be moving into the adoption process. March 13th for the housing production strategy will go to the Planning Commission, and it'll go to City Council on April 19th. And then March 27th, the economic opportunities analysis will go to the Planning Commission, and on May 3rd to City Council. So that's kind of what you have in store for you in the coming weeks. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Todd, and he can start with economic opportunities analysis. And Todd, you want me to advance the slides for you, or you want to
try it?
You can take the seat. Why don't you take the seat?
Thank you, Steve. We're going to describe some of the key findings from both the economic opportunity analysis and the housing needs analysis tonight. These are draft findings. They're subject to change based on input we receive between now and whenever they do eventually get adopted. In Oregon, cities are required, when they update their comprehensive plan, to ensure that they have a 20-year supply of land to handle projected job growth and projected population growth. And so really, this is the effort to look at both jobs and housing at the same time. Some communities take it one at a time. Canby's got more of the holistic approach, which I think is the preferable approach to looking at this equation. And a lot of the work we do is technical, but we also have a lot of public input along the way. And so the public input has helped us kind of come up with some of the objectives that we'll describe tonight in terms of potential actions that the city could adopt as part of these planning efforts. And both these plans set the stage for both an urban growth boundary look as well as a zoning look on the city's remaining lands. For the economic opportunities analysis, we wanted to build on a lot of the prior work that the city's done. I was fortunate because I've been able to work for the City of Canby for almost 30 years on different projects now. Including an economic strategy that was done about 10 years ago, Pioneer Industrial Park, that was done maybe 18 years ago, and then the urban growth boundary urban reserve analysis, which was done about 25 years ago. So I really enjoyed kind of the working with Canby over the years and watching it kind of evolve and still retain its small town charm, but still be home to a number of substantial businesses and great diverse housing. For the EOA, the vision is really to build on what you've already been doing, which is strengthening the economy through some economic policies that include objectives related to, A, the adequate urban growth boundary. That's going to be subject to a lot of analysis over the next 12 months through the transportation system plan, a lot of public facility plans that get reviewed as part of that look. But that's important that the City Council and Planning Commission are supportive of expanding or at least looking at UGB expansion opportunities. Looking at the buildable land inventory, making sure we are utilizing to the extent possible what we do have inside the current city boundary, as well as optimizing the infrastructure investments the city has already made in roads, sewer, and water. Making sure that there's opportunities for all people, regardless of income, race, culture, and background. We've begun to evaluate that as part of the housing needs analysis and the housing production strategy. So we now have more information than we've ever had before about priority populations in Canby. Several opportunities for community participation. That's going to continue. We're going to build on that and report to you the results along the way and adopt some specific goals and objectives related to actions that are going to be, we'll talk about in a minute, for the furthering these economic opportunities. Let's see. The growth scenarios that we looked at, one of the things you might recall, we came to you in the fall, we talked about some of these growth scenarios. And we have three scenarios that we evaluated. One we consider to be a low growth scenario, which is also equivalent to what we call the safe harbor scenario. It's very unlikely to be appealed because we're basically equating job growth to projected housing growth. And it's just one technique that communities in Oregon can revert to. And what we found is that through our work with our EOA committee, that really the medium growth scenario is probably more likely, because in Canby, you've kind of historically been kind of a commuter economy where people live here more than work here. And over time, over the last 10 years with the Pioneer Industrial Park coming online, it's kind of begun to switch to more of a balanced live-work city. And so this medium growth scenario really builds on that. By assuming that job growth is going to at least be consistent with what you've been doing over the last 11 years, and that the retail and government sector growth will grow more like in line with what's going on in the broader region that's projected by Oregon Employment Department. Canby has a little bit of catching up to do with retail and service sector job growth. So it makes sense to assume that we're going to have slightly higher capture rate as we add households, we'll add more demand for services. And we consider this to be the most likely growth scenario based on the historic and emerging trends. So that's the one that we've been trying to hang our hat on for this work. The high growth scenario could be justified. It's like the medium growth scenario, but it just assumes we're going to have a couple of additional prime industrial sites that are going to be served and ready for future larger employers. These tend to be, 5, 10 acre sites at least, and cities in Oregon are allowed to do that. You're allowed to have strategic growth objectives related to certain types of industries if you choose to. But this scenario would actually result in additional land needs and a few, 300 more industrial jobs, potentially 460 additional service jobs relative to the medium growth scenario, but it would be a lot more land than what we projected in terms of the medium growth scenario. So it's going to high bar to jump over. So the committee has endorsed the medium growth scenario. I'm going to talk about what the land needs are associated with that, and these are all preliminary numbers. They're likely to change as we advance the BAW. But the overall land needs shown here in this table, where the first column shows what you have to work with, which is vacant land inventory. This is land that's, it may not be on the market today, but it's considered to be vacant and buildable. And so we have 17 acres of commercial, and we have about 145 acres of industrial, and that was in the land supply, about 162 what we consider to be gross buildable, unconstrained acres. So it's not in wetlands, it's not in floodplains, no steep slopes. The demand under the medium scenario could be as high as 626 acres. It could be less than that if maybe we assume a few less warehousing distribution jobs and a few more high-tech and manufacturing jobs. But generally, based on the preliminary numbers we've seen, we're coming in about 626, and the high, you can see it goes up to about 672 acres. And these are net buildable acres. The shortfall equates to about 460 acres under the medium scenario, 510 on the high. So this indicates that we should be exploring about 400 acres of additional expansion areas. Not that the city has to expand that far, but it does justify potentially at least the reasonableness to look that far. If you can't expand the UGB that much, nobody's going to make you expand the UGB more than what you can justify through the next level of process and planning. But that would require some additional partnerships and things like that with other communities like Wilsonville and others, where you focus on your strengths, they can focus on their strengths. Maybe you don't need to accommodate all those warehousing jobs here. Maybe they can accommodate some, or Woodburn's making they're adding warehousing jobs there, so maybe they can take some of that overflow. But it does basically justify at least a look outside the current boundary. The development aspirations that were adopted in 2013, you can kind of look through the list. You probably remember this. And a lot of these just are, things that the state would like cities to make clear to their community residents what they're trying to achieve through any policy changes, zone changes, UGB changes, land use changes that are adopted as a result of these planning documents. But it's focused on quality of life, quality jobs where they're paying higher than the county average in terms of the types of jobs you'd really like to attract as a city, improving your tax base, which doesn't really mean more revenue to the city, but it could mean less property taxes to the average homeowner as you add assessed value to the community. under Measure 5 and 50. That's how it works in Oregon. Improving the Highway 99E corridor, at least the look of it, the buildings, the mixes of uses, design along the corridor, perhaps some of the access and all that by working with ODOT over time. Paying attention to the corridor is important because that is basically your front door and back door. Well-designed range of housing types. The workforce housing keeps coming up in both the HNA and EOA. And what that means, basically, housing that's affordable to kind of workers making median wages. And as you know, that's a big challenge now. So the range of housing types is key there. And the existing community residents really stress the importance of neighborhood safety and livability with minimum cut-through traffic from trucks in particular, but also other vehicles. And improving the pedestrian connections between jobs and residences. So those are all key aspirations. They're going to be carried into the EOA through objectives. And those objectives are starting to be shown here. Again, these are draft. It's fine to wordsmith them. If you have specific changes, please email those to Don or Jamie, and they'll get those into the document. But enhancing the positive business environment with adequate sites to address the future growth opportunities, planning for industrial expansion areas. This says east and north of Milano Road, but it could be in other locations. Retaining and attracting businesses with these high density numbers or high wage numbers, providing incentives for targeted job creation and major private investment. Those incentives could basically be just making sure public infrastructure is provided, or at least providing a financial mechanism for developers who are willing to make those investments to pay back the city over time for those investments, either through a local improvement district or sometimes I've seen communities use urban renewal districts to pay for infrastructure, which can match private money as well. So there's ways to do that. And beginning to monitor and support any expansion in health services. Someday Canby might have a hospital here, with inpatient care. So, make sure that's an opportunity down the road. And supporting workforce training and development by working with partnering agencies. Those are the basic economic objectives. We have some more. Again, I talked about workforce housing, expanding those opportunities. The city's been monitoring that carefully. And we'll talk about those as part of the HNA analysis of ways to do that. We also sometimes call that middle housing. I've seen it used interchangeably. Expanding lodging options potentially. There's not much you can do. You're not going to build a hotel, but you can at least make sure we have a location for a potential hotel in the city. Funding roads and infrastructure with some innovative techniques, and this could include some system development charge updates. As I mentioned, urban renewal planning could be done. We've used local improvement districts. There's a number of techniques we've used to help communities make sure that they have adequate funding for the roads and water and sewer systems. Beginning to build on the arts and visitation, including agri and bicycle tourism. That was mentioned by the community as things they'd like to support here in terms of additional retail patronage, especially in downtown, after hours, on weekends. Attracting additional downtown redevelopment and some mixed-use development with housing potentially next to or above commercial. We've already seen that happen in recent years. Seems to be working pretty well as long as you have the parking to support it. Updating design standards and providing incentives for building renovations. Design's really important. As communities grow, you can't ignore the importance of what the buildings look like, how the community feels. And I've seen some really good examples of design. I've seen some really poor examples in other cities. So design guidelines are one way to get there. City's going to be looking at some of those code changes with respect to some residential design standards, but you could carry that into other non-residential standards as well. And generally, just thinking global and regional and acting local, as I mentioned, you may not be able to accommodate the full amount of land needs here. So having partners throughout the region are going to be important to make sure that Canby can kind of hand off opportunities and take on opportunities as they get handed to you in terms of business investment and job growth. Those are a lot of the objectives. I don't know if there's any others you all would like to see added or things you'd like to change in terms of objectives. Open it up for a few minutes.
About the hospital, our population's around 18,000-ish now. What is the size of the city that normally has its own hospital? I know that like 50 years ago, Oregon City had 2 hospitals with half our population, but was probably over-hospitaled at that time.
Yeah, that's a good one. Not sure, but it seems to be closer to 70 plus in my mind, 50 to 70. Even like Oswego doesn't have a hospital at 50,000. But, you know, that doesn't mean you can't have special, you know, medical centers that treat certain types of ailments or, you know, certain types of cancer, you know, that type of thing. But you're right, we're probably not going to have our own hospital in the near term.
Another question too, and I'm pretty much confident with the answer, but the land considered to be vacant and buildable on slide number 9, that doesn't include the vacant, or not vacant, but the land that's the golf course, right?
Correct, does not include that, right.
I think something else that's important to point out that we had talked about when we were having these discussions is the land that is showing on that chart that shows as currently buildable does not take into account applications that the planning commission or the city council have approved to build a building on.
Right.
So if like some of that acreage is actually already slated to have a building on it, it's not being captured as being technically used at the time of the snapshot, right?
Correct. Yeah, if the building permit hasn't been issued, you know, on the land, we're counting it as vacant, even though some preliminary applications have been made. So we might be overstating the vacant land supply.
Don, this question would be for you. How many applications do you think we have? What part of that vacant land do you think we have currently in the application process?
And great question. I don't have an exact number. I think, yeah, I would say that the concern perhaps, it's both on residential and employment, but on residential, I think there is a considerable number, because on residential, you could put a public streets in, you could have a recorded plat. Again, the same thing applies. If a building permit is not issued for a home, it's vacant, even though it's fully committed to, and essentially it's absorbed already. I'd say the order of magnitude for residential, and we're gonna have to see this play out, and part of the reason for adopting the housing needs analysis later is that we want to we want to not undercount the amount of those situations, so I'd rather not have that scenario. So I'd say you're probably looking at, I'm just rough guess, there could be 50, you know, on a residential side in terms of lots, there could be 50 or 60 lots of 7 to 10,000 square foot lot sizes that might not be counted in the residential. On the employment side, at one point I could probably say there was certainty around Amazon, and I don't think there's certainty around Amazon. I mean, it was almost a sure thing. You know, then their economy turned down and they've laid off a bunch of people. So that property, even though it's technically approved for a warehouse, I mean, it could be something else besides Amazon. It went through that process. They didn't, it was a prior application for that. Amazon did not go through its process fully, but there was a prior approval of that, which would mean a warehouse could go in there They could pull a building permit now and do that, and that would absorb that property. So they'd have to go through a modification process. That may have to go back through the planning commission, but that would be another 46 acres of land on the industrial side. So I'd say roughly on the industrial side, I would guess we're probably in the 50-acre range, and on the residential side, it would probably be in about the 25 acre range that would be less in counting that. And so those are important considerations as we go forward in this process. The state, it makes it pretty conservative on urban growth boundary expansions. It's just that's their buildable lands model, which we have to follow. So it's not a model that necessarily promotes expansion. So I think that's something we're just recognizing.
I'll just add to, as we get into housing discussion, because we're more certain as a city that the housing that we've received preliminary applications for will move forward over the next year. We've gone ahead and we've pulled that out of the buildable land inventory, assuming that they're going to move forward. But with the jobs, we're not because of the economy, we're not as certain. So we've kept that in the vacant land inventory, those pre-apps. So
Would it be possible in our reports, as we start thinking through this, if we can maybe make it a sub-item of that so that we kind of have an idea, a little bit more of an idea of how much of that land is potentially out there, right? So that we don't, because we don't want to make that mistake, right? We don't want to.
we want to track. We're going to be tracking them both carefully.
Yeah, we don't want to assume it's available when it's not, right? So
Good point.
yeah, so if we could have maybe dial that number in a little bit more so that we can keep
Yeah.
that in consideration.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Don had just a quick clarification question, in case I missed it, on the Amazon property. If they were to pull a permit, they could go ahead because it's already approved. If they were to sell the property, they have to start over, correct? Or is it approved?
It goes with the
regardless?
land, and so let's say hypothetically Chewy dog and cat food comes into town and wants to. I mean, I'm just putting an example out there. They could theoretically come in and pull a building permit now for that
Oh, okay.
project.
So the permitting goes with
Yeah,
the land
it
regardless?
does.
Okay.
But they would have to fit with that prior approval, which was speculative, and that went through a speculative review, and essentially for, the size of the building and the amount of parking would have to match up. It did not match up for Amazon. They completely revamped it. And so it didn't meet their needs, but, again, it'd have to match up on the transportation side of things as well, not be beyond, it'd have to be in sync with that, but essentially that approval is vested.
So they'd only come before the planning commission if there were exceptions that they wanted?
Exactly, like if it was, and there's a gradation of this process, which comes back to planning staff to look at how significant is that modification. If it was a major item, which would be like traffic, and that's why Amazon went back through, because it was like 1,000 more trips and they were at different times of the day. That, in our opinion, was a major item which needed to go back through the planning commission. They were literally on the 1 yard line to go to the planning commission, and then they put it on hold. So it was like almost ready to be noticed. And so that's when the economy, I think they were starting to sense that people weren't buying as many products. I think that COVID was really good for Amazon, and then people started going out and shopping at different venues, and so that kind of affected them.
Okay, thank you for that. And now the mayor is able to join us now, so I'm going to actually turn the discussion over for him to facilitate now. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Other thoughts, conversation pieces? Yes, Councilor Davis.
Thank you for the presentation, good information. I was wondering, where do property come in for future parks? I mean, we talk about residential and industrial, but athletic fields, and because that's something that we're struggling with now as far as future properties for parks and athletic fields and things like that.
Well, we've assumed that about 25% of the land is added for public facilities on top of the baseline net demand for housing and jobs. Now, that 25% could be for roads, it could be for parks. We don't really know. It probably is not enough for a school, but but that's how the state allows us to take that into account at this point.
Could we look at that a little bit closer, Don, in regards to, what is the needs analysis for, because we know we need athletic fields, for instance, within the city, rather than just calling it public, whether it's schools, or can we specifically identify or put into the plan the need for future parks and athletic fields?
I think a great question. The one thing I think in terms of the industrial aspect, the sports complex, I think could arguably be something that could fit into the industrial area. It's as one of those items that would, it's just as an example. It's not a direct answer to your question, but I think those things are consistent essentially with the idea of like commerce, et cetera. So I think that's one answer. We absolutely can look at the needs for that overall. I think there could be some way of synergies around a sports complex, for example, with commercial and employment all together into one larger development concept. That's something that. So we have several layers here. We have the needs for the employment that we're looking at right now, and that's kind of specific. And then I think going forward, the details of this is the acreage and the raw acreage piece of this. The other piece is kind of drilling that down. And we're not 100% sure. This is going through the comp plan process where everything is going to land, but I think part of that process is going to be looking at infrastructure and the needs for that and that area. And it may end up being that there's a need for a concept plan as we go further down the path, which starts to get into more detail beyond even the growth boundary issue about exactly what the anticipation is going to be for certain areas that are expanded into. And that parks element, I think, fits in well with that discussion as well as we go into that detail. This is kind of starting from very macro level to kind of diving deeper into that. But we had some initial discussions with Department of Land Conservation and Development, and they were Todd and Steve can weigh in on this, but they were not in opposition to the idea that parks could fit into that kind of a arena where it's mixed in with employment.
Yeah, and I'll just add that what we took away from that was that if we have a parks master plan, I believe the city has, we can take the acreage requirements from that and during the UGB evaluation, take that into account over and above the housing and the jobs requirements. Yeah.
Commissioner Ebert.
I don't know if now is the time to bring this up or what piece of where it would work, but we had a discussion briefly the other night at the meeting about infill within the boundaries that we have now. I'm talking more of not the downtown, but the greater downtown area. Mm-hmm. Canby has got a lot of very large lots that are some of our single-family houses sit on. I know the state of Oregon has really pushed over the years for us to enhance our infilling as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So we have that. We have the large lots that we have. We're talking about having to gobble up some more land around the outside of us. Personally, my feeling on that is I'd like to gobble up as little of that land as we possibly can. Sure. At this rollout of this one. Is there any way, and then we also talk about the whole, and I really hate the word cottage housing, but somehow we've got to get housing in our area that people can afford. Mm-hmm. And these young whether it's young families, I'm looking more at young professionals, and I'm looking more at the health of downtown, where they eat, where they shop, those kinds of things. And I'm just wondering, in this process, is there any way for us to do an inventory of lots that are, say, I don't know, twice the size that they really need to be, so that we could maybe create a special zoning or something that, and I also hate the word tiny house, but, you know, putting in some of these 900,000, 1,100 square foot houses on some of these larger lots, giving some of the families that have these larger lots. Now, granted, some people are not going to want to do this, but there's probably some of them out there that haven't even really thought about it. But if we give them the functionality, the ability to do that, we could maybe plug in some of these things, get some of these young professionals, young families, get them into our downtown area. And it just seems like if we created an environment where this could work, I'm not sure how many acres, but I think it could actually be gauged in acres, because I think there's a lot of pieces of land within where we're at now. So I guess my question, I say all that to say, is there any way that we could do some kind of an inventory of, say, lots that are in X size, that have a single family dwelling on them, that have an extra amount of piece of land that we could possibly plug in? Now, I know there's going to be some people in Canby that say, oh my God, you're taking away, you know, we like the big lots and single family houses and so on and so forth. But rather than chewing up our farmland all around us, even if just 50% or 40% of those people that have those large lots, we get that news out there and say, you know, you could carve this off and develop this. I could see where people might take advantage of that kind of a thing.
So great points, and we definitely include part vacant land in our buildable land inventory. Not only vacant land, but part vacant land where there is a structure and it has value, and we're assuming that that house or commercial building is going to stay there, and they're still going to partition it so that they have room for parking and they have room for open space, but the rest of it becomes available to build on in the next 20 years. So we do have that. We have that information. We can map it. It's part of our buildable land inventory. We did that work, so that's critical. It's part of our supply, a buildable supply. We've counted that, and that you're right. That plus there's redevelopment, and redevelopment could be an existing business adding a shift of workers, or, you know, putting additional workers in the same area through flex space arrangements. And we factored that in too, to some degree, to account for about 20% of the total job growth. So we've tried to build that, bake that into the assumptions so far. But we'll talk more about the potential for these types of innovative housing options in this segment of the presentation.
Can I answer? Sure. Just wanted to add to that, as we talked in the Planning Commission, and there is going to be more discussion here, but as part of the housing needs analysis and as part of the urban growth boundary expansion exercise, the state does require us to look at measures to limit the need to expand. And the cottage ordinance that we talked about at the Planning Commission, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, cottage ordinance, plan unit development, updated ordinance, and looking at allowing residential above commercial on the south side of 99E are three elements that we had picked out that we believe the Planning Commission should look further at. I think the cottage item is one. Obviously, I think there, as Todd mentioned, there's an accounting for that. Part of that is what would help in that situation, to the point that you're making, is that we don't have a zoning tool to help promote that. And that zoning tool is part of what we're calling efficiency measures. Those three items that I mentioned would be coming forward before adoption of the housing needs analysis and before we initiated the urban growth boundary expansion to justify that. So there will be an accounting for that in terms of what Todd said, and also more of an incentive base for someone to do that than current, where we don't really have a code provision. You can do accessory dwelling units or follow House Bill 2001, which allows duplexes, on a single lot, which is not what you're talking about, but that's a similar concept, but with two single-family homes, maybe a smaller home, which is quote a cottage, whatever what you're calling that, or it could be, you know, larger single-family home with a smaller home, cottage home near it. But I think in terms of addressing those provisions, that would help at least incentivize that, which I don't believe the current code really has a provision to do that.
And I think also to just, in the promoting of that, we could look at our SDCs, you know, if you've got a smaller lot, there's different ways that we can
Sure.
incentivize it.
Yep.
And then I think we also need to look at the things that we've done in the past. In the last 20 years, what have we done that's worked and not worked? Yeah, we bounce around and we talk about the commercial with the living above and stuff. Well, we've done that in different areas in town. Some of it's worked, some of it not so much. And I think we really need to take a look at what we've done that's worked and what we've done that hasn't worked or has been a minimal effort. So I think that in this process, I think that's really something we need to look at and address, in my opinion.
So I thought we got through the whole presentation, so thank you, Council President Hensley. So I know that we still have the housing piece that we really haven't done the presentation portion of, so I want to get to that, but I want to close out. If you can back up the slides to the objective, yeah, thank you, the economic objectives. I want to close the loop here. Are there pieces in here? Do we agree with all 13 of the objectives that have been laid out here and presented as is? Are there changes from the economic development objectives that we want to add, change, or discuss further?
Can I, excuse me, can I say something?
Yes, you can.
How deep in the woods are we getting in here tonight, Don?
How deep do you want to go?
I would say we were looking for, I mean, if you wanted to add a new item or do a modification to these objectives, we're open for discussion.
We talked about this in the Planning Commission. I just want to be certain. So this is the same conversations that were had in the 70s, exact same conversations. The problem is 20 years later, 25 years later, when it came about, it was a brand new council, brand new staff, brand new planning commission, and nobody had a clue what happened. When the industrial area master plan got approved, I stood up in that front of that council and said, how are you going to pay for this? And they all looked at each other just dumbfounded. That's where urban renewal was born. And my point there is, when you expand the growth boundaries, especially with industrial, and we've talked about this, the need for education. I guess that's what I like to see here is where does that education piece come in here? Because it's going to be needed. Because if you think you're going to expand this growth boundary like they did in the early 80s and not bring in the property owners for that discussion, which is exactly what happened, this is going to be a complete disaster. You won't have the situation if it wasn't for those property owners coming together and me being able to lead them and collect $100,000 to convince the city that it really was their industrial park. That park wouldn't be here today. I don't want to see those property owners 20 years from now going, what the hell just happened? So in this piece somewhere needs to be, how's this stuff's going to get financed? How are people, if you put people in the growth boundary, when you do that with industrial, you make those houses and farms worthless the minute you do that. But these property, a lot of those guys, but now they've got to annex in. That is not cheap. So, you got some here, we got to have an education piece. I've said this, to Don, whether it's housing or industrial, we got to get those property owners sitting in here in these meetings now, because you got to get them on board. And there's got to be into this plan a mechanism for these property owners to be able to change the zoning and allow them to get out versus, because what you get is what we call no-growthers, and they love to raise hell on this stuff. And it really prolongs the ability to bring these properties to the way you want them to be. And so bringing in the financial piece, the education piece, how you're going to pay for all this stuff. I'm talking about the infrastructure and the annexations. That's got to be part of this. So 20 years from now, it's just clear what happened. I'm telling you, it's going to be a nightmare because you now have an example that those property owners can look back on, and when they see what we went through, good luck. They won't move. They won't allow you to bring that EGB out. So you got to get them involved, got to get them educated. You got to get this town educated, and there's got to be in the plan a mechanism. Some 20 years from now, everybody's very clear how this is going to work, or it will be a disaster. This will be for naught, I'm telling you.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Patton?
Well, I think what I find interesting about that is there's been several open meetings about both this economic development plan and this housing needs analysis. And how's the attendance been for those meetings? I mean, have you packed the room on any of those meetings?
They've not been packed.
Yeah, and the city has been informed. I mean, the city is getting the word out to people that these meetings are happening, and this is the opportunity for these landowners, for people, for citizens to come in and make their case. I hate to be brutally honest, but short of going out and stapling a notice to every person's head in this community, you still will not pack this room. You will still be left with a number of people that will say, at the end of the day, I wasn't included in this plan. I had no idea that this was coming. I mean, I saw it when I was on the planning commission. There would be people who would show up and complain that this or that or the other was being built in their backyard. And the fact of the matter was the zoning for those particular areas was put in the 80s. And I mean, the tools are there for them to see that information. I think the city does need to go out of its way to make sure that all those people are included. I agree with you that there needs to be a certain amount of emphasis put on education and making sure that there's ownership in the plan by the entire city. But no matter how much you do it, no matter how hard you drag people kicking and screaming, there are still going to be people that are upset that Canby is growing, that it doesn't look the way it did back in the 50s or the 70s or the 80s or the 2000s. We just have to use this to lay the best plan as possible, and eventually it becomes the next council that we just hope that the next council and the next planning commission don't curse us out saying that we screwed them over. I mean, to me, that's really the only thing that we can do.
I just wanted to maybe address part of that. I'm trying to navigate between the comments. There will be scenario planning as part of the comprehensive plan exercise. Very, very important that property owners are included in that process. I want to recognize, first of all, that we're not going to be doing anything against somebody's will here in this process. We're looking for raised hands here. We're not looking to get into a protracted, battle with folks over boundary expansions. That's not healthy and not productive. Great questions and comments. I think we are struggling with community, to some degree, getting community engagement. The comprehensive plan will also have what we have a public input tool, which is going to be, I think, a much broader brush to get more people involved. But that's clearly the objective of the next steps here that are going beyond the housing production and economic opportunity analysis, and trying to really engage the community, and also in different ways than we've done before, and even meeting the community out where they're at versus having them come here. But I do think that the scenario planning, and I'm going to be looking to Steve Faust with 3J, because they're leading the comprehensive plan update as well, that in that work, which will be scoping of that's going to be coming up in the next budgeting process, that the scenario planning is clearly articulated in that scope, at which will be reach out to property owners that their interests are being heard in that process. Some of this is a little challenging in terms of going through the exercise where we have to do a lot of inventory of like, how does these areas get served? What areas should be expanded into based on soil type and agricultural productivity? What is the community sentiment? What are the levels of service that need to be provided? What is the city's cost for those things? All those are going to be considered as part of that process. So I just want to, kind of navigate between the two issues. We are challenged to some degree trying to get more involvement. But at the same time, I think we also want to make sure that property owners are clearly involved in that exercise. I don't have all the answers. We don't have all the answers yet. That's why we're going to go through the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan updates. And some of the stuff is going to be vetted out, which will even include like level of service on transportation. That may be a limiting factor depending on what the levels of service are going to be and what's adopted by the council. So I figured I should just at least interject here before we get into further discussions. I also would like this group to be the ambassadors for outreach and engagement. You folks are all involved in the community, but I think that's really helpful. And we'll also have an advisory committee of 20 members, which will be starting in March. The invites are going out for that. So that's another group as well. But I think all that stuff said, I think it's going to be important to not only get the community involved, but the property owners. And there's going to have to be a little patience here in this process because we're not going to get to scenario planning until next fiscal year. This next roughly 6 months, well, it's now 4-month period, will be kind of finishing up this fiscal year and in getting the baseline information together.
Just follow up on that one. So I just go back on all that in the past. And again, it's the same conversation that was had in the 70s, early 80s. And supposedly all those property owners were mailed to, it was put in the paper a couple times, yada, yada, yada. We never got anything and our neighbors didn't either. So yeah, let's go knock on their doors and make sure they got this. Because you got to have them on board, right? And you're going to have how are these guys going to be able to annex in? Who's going to pay for that? Who's going to pay for the infrastructure? And that has got to be part of this. I'm telling you. I'm done.
Thank you. Anything else on the economic front here so we can move on to the housing? Once, twice?
All right.
So,
You will see a land use permitting education for property owners objective in the housing piece, and I certainly don't have a problem including that in the economic development objectives as well, because it was mentioned during the housing discussion. So we can talk about that. So housing. So Canby's growing. Since the pandemic, I think population generally has been shifting a little bit outside of Multnomah County and into some of the surrounding areas, especially Clark County, but also places like Canby, McMinnville, and some of the other areas. The current forecasts indicate that the city's population would grow from about 18,700 currently to about 24,600 over the next 20 years. So significant measurable growth, 5,931 people to accommodate housing for. In Oregon, we're required to use these PSU population growth forecasts for long-range planning. So there could be alternative forecasts, but this is what we're trying to house in terms of net new growth for the city. The other focus area with the state and a lot of cities we're working in now throughout the West is on rent burdens and making sure we're aware of what's called significant rent burden and just or severe rent burden, where households that are renters pay over half of their income on rent for their household. And in Canby, the situation is not quite as dire as the state as a whole or Clackamas County, with about 17% of the renter households paying over half of their income on rent. But that does add up to about 342 households in Canby. So, close to 1,000 residents that are probably very income limited in Canby currently at a minimum. There's another 717 households that pay between 30 and 50% of their income on rent in Canby. That's considered rent burdened, but not severely rent burdened. So we're definitely aware. It was made aware. We did, when we had the public meetings here, the room was pretty well packed, at least the first few meetings. So we did hear quite a bit about the need for additional rental housing. With respect to median home prices, this information was pulled together about a year ago when we did this analysis. Looked at it recently for Canby. The median home sales price in Canby has since declined a little bit from $560,000 to about $545,000. So down a little bit from last December, a year and a month ago, but still significantly higher than it was, say 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And we're seeing that in pretty much all the communities we're working in. You can see here, Oregon City, Wilsonville, Aurora, rent prices have been going up about 15% per year. One thing we also try to look at and pay attention to is kind of what's affordable to households that are, earning different levels of income. And this chart tries to show you what housing types might be affordable or attainable to, say, a household, the high end, a lawyer or doctor making over $128,000 per year. Could probably afford one of those median price homes in Canby, but $655,000 mortgage they could probably afford. And then when you get down to an average engineer by themselves making about $85,000 median salary would not be able to afford the median priced home, be a little bit of a stretch, $430,000. So hopefully they're married to another engineer or because typically there's two wage earners in a household, but not always. A teacher making about $67,000 per year could be able to afford a rent of about $1,600 per month, which might get them a 1-bedroom, but probably not a 2-bedroom, and probably wouldn't be able to afford a detached home, but might be able to afford a townhome or a manufactured home or prefab home. The medical assistant, less so, about $41,000 per year, max rent of about $1,000. When you get below that level, you're really talking about difficulty in terms of finding housing for people earning that level of income. They're going to need, we naturally occurring affordable housing would be basically accessory dwelling units or really small cottages at that point. That's why we're trying to provide a wide mix of housing. In this table, we're basically showing what our draft reflection was of the types of housing units to accommodate the population growth forecast. And we were planning for about 2,286 new housing units. That number probably won't change, but the mix can change. And the mix that we originally thought about in this draft did put a lot of emphasis on detached housing, about 1,113 standard detached homes in Canby, but that's only about half of the overall need. The rest of it would need to be in smaller unit houses, small lot housing, townhomes, duplexes, apartments, and other types of government assisted or cottage homes or ADUs. So it shifts considerably what you see on the ground today, which is about 2/3 detached and 1/3 everything else, to about more of a 50-50 mix. And we're likely going to change this again because DLCD came back and said, well, we think you're going to need to show even more demand for the low and very low households, even though your capture rate and ability to finance those units isn't there today. You don't have the grants, you don't have the funding to build public housing, but they do want us to show the demand. So we will need to basically increase some of those government-assisted numbers and ADU numbers to reflect their comments. But based on the mix that we were showing, we were assuming that we would need about 530 acres of land, sorted into the detached category, kind of manufactured home category, townhomes and plexes, and then apartments or multifamily, spread about all those units. If we do reflect DLCT's comments, we'll probably see a little less land demand for the standard detached homes, a little more demand for the other categories, which you'll see in the next iteration of this report. What we have to work with is about 329 total acres. This is vacant and part vacant acres that you were talking about. So it does include the vacant and part vacant categories, but we have removed all the land that has a preliminary application at this time. And Don mentioned we can bring that estimate to a footnote in this table so you can keep track of that. But we are going to need to keep track of that between now and adoption. But because the actual number of UGB expansion area probably won't be 201 acres. It might be less, probably will be less. But that's what we're showing now. We are required to look at land efficiency measures before any urban growth boundary expansion can occur in Oregon. We're going to talk about a number of land efficiency measures that have actually been adopted in Canby over the last few years, as well as some new ones you're considering. And the city will pursue the following ones as part of the comp plan related update, including a planned unit development code update and the cottage development ordinance for cottages, and also begin to look at a mixed-use overlay along the 99 corridor for certain portions of it that might make sense for vertical or horizontal housing next to commercial. So those are things that I think the city's well prepared to dive into next or later this year. The adopted housing production strategies that the city has already adopted over the last, I believe it's just a few years, right, Don? Special housing projects for elderly or handicapped. I think Ryan mentioned that you have had this in place for quite a long time and it hasn't really been utilized. So this one might have been around for a long time, but basically, it does allow deviations in standard development standards for specific housing for the elderly or handicapped population. The next is housing specifically defined in the downtown core of the C1 zone that could have lower parking provisions if it's mixed use. Some cities have removed the parking requirement entirely for mixed use in these downtown cores. You don't have to do that, but would be looking at maybe lowering that. Or you did do this. So
Yes,
you
yeah.
removed it. That's for the Dahlia building?
It is for a subset of the C1 zone in the downtown. There's no parking required. It's part of our code and part of the downtown area. So that's in play.
Okay. In the higher density R2 zone, it's been amended to require a minimum density of 14 units per acre, which is basically like a townhome style development. So you can't build detached subdivision in a high density zone in Canby, which makes a lot of sense. And revising the development code to allow duplexes on lots zoned for single family detached development to meet state requirements for House Bill 2001. I believe Canby's already done this, for corner lots and single-family zones for quite a long time. Now we'll extend that to all low-density zones. Some of the new housing production strategies that we're going to be talking about Includes a process for identifying land to upzone for middle housing. You saw in the one graph where we do have a deficit for townhomes and apartments for land needs. Some of that could be met through basically upzoning some R1 to R2 in certain cases. So we'd be looking for places to do that in the city where it might make sense as part of the next kind of evaluation during the comp plan update. As we mentioned, the cottage cluster development standard or zone, that can be done as a floating zone where it could be applied to any location in the city, or as a specific defined zone area that could be maybe in one of the outline areas that are ripe for PUD, or even in future urban growth boundary expansion areas. Identifying opportunities to streamline the PUD process. This is what's expensive for developers when they have to come back and get reviews and then revisions on those reviews over and over and over because they weren't sure about the design standards or something changed and some new requirement wasn't made clear. So that would help lower their costs. Hopefully they could pass that cost savings on to property owners or future homeowners. And the incentives to encourage development PUDs, sometimes these could be zoning incentives, such as a bonus density incentive for mixed-use development, or even for multifamily development or tax abatement. Sometimes we've seen that used to encourage apartments and vertical housing in different areas. So that could be considered. Sometimes it's financial incentives. If we're talking about an urban renewal area in a location that needs future infrastructure or roads, that could be an incentive for the developer to use some urban renewal funds to help match their investment in those roads. So there's lots of ways to do incentives. It was mentioned earlier, modifying the SDC schedule so that smaller homes, smaller detached homes pay significantly less than larger estate homes. We've done that in several communities in Oregon now and other states. This seems to be kind of an equitable way to promote lower priced housing in the community. At least it's one thing the city can do. It's one thing the city can control. You can't control many of these factors, but that's one thing you can control. Updating your housing needs periodically. I think this was last done about 20 years ago. So this would probably revisit every, say, 5 years and look at your housing needs, see how we're doing every 5 years or so. And maybe annually, maybe every couple of years, doing a periodic review of barriers to development. This would be working with developers that are active in the community and property owners to find out what they consider to be problems for the city to address, or barriers. So getting more in tune with the property owner's perspective on that. And again, this was mentioned earlier for jobs, but also land use permitting, education for property owners and developers. This is important because, as it was mentioned, maybe a half of our land is in part vacant parcels that the property owner basically has to opt to subdivide. And so we really do need to reach out to those property owners and help them understand the process, what it costs, what are the steps, different types of permits. Amend the commercial zoning to allow mixed-use housing. This one is another one kind of like the mixed-use overlay on Highway 99. It's probably where this plays in. But basically, this would be considered, and typically you only look at places that are very walkable, that might have transit or shuttle service, that have services within walking distance. So it's usually pretty limited in terms of where you might consider this mixed-use overlay. So those are all the production strategies. And now we can open it up for more discussion.
Great, thank you for that. I appreciate it. It's interesting, the Council President Hensley and I are here talking about the modified SDC fee schedule based on home size as a strategy, and maybe this is part of that conversation. But when we look at, right, the SDC is about future impact on the system. So how does a family of 5 in a 1,500 square foot home provide less drain on the system than 5 people in a 3,000 square foot home? I understand it's purely, I know that the strain is not different, but it's
Right.
purely incentivizing the smaller. And so I asked this the other night, last week, and this is my piggyback question was, how does the savings on the SDC front carry down to the home buyer versus the bottom line of the developer and builder?
Yeah. When we're talking about detached homes, I don't think there's much of a savings. Typically, SDCs only account for 5 to 10% of the home price. So even if you reduce it, you might be shaving, 5% at most. But every little bit helps, I guess, and there's no guarantee that developer's going to pass that savings on, right? However, when we're talking about a accessory dwelling unit or a small cottage home, I think then when the unit's less than 1,000 square feet, we will see less occupancy in that unit, and we can definitely quantify. Some cities have even exempted ADUs, like Wilsonville, from SDCs entirely. But we can certainly document a lower occupancy rate for cottage homes than large homes.
Yes, Councilor Patton.
It just, the one thing that stands out to me and makes my hair stand up on the back of my neck is the parking portion.
Mike?
Oh, sorry. One of the things that really makes my hair stand up on this is the parking portion. I don't understand how we can plan for growth but not say there's going to be no increased need for parking. It makes no sense.
There will be a need for parking.
Yeah, I know, but it says that there isn't up there. And that's the thing that drives me crazy, is that we can allow these larger developments to come in and there not be a requirement to have the parking to fix them. And I look down here to the Dahlia, and, yeah, the parking isn't super bad down there, but I don't know if anybody notices that more and more people are parking in that little parking lot across from Key Bank. That's not the Dahlia's property, that's Cuts Force. And they have a plan for something on that property. And when that property gets developed, all those cars are gonna have to get seated in around those parking spots. And so I really think that there needs to be a part of this that looks at a comprehensive plan for parking long-term in the downtown core.
Is that a parking garage?
Parking garage, above, under the buildings, catacombs, I don't care what it is, we gotta look at it. Yeah, dig out from underneath, have our own big dig underneath the whole downtown and create parking. Or something, but I think, this, when I was on planning commission, I know this was, for other planning commissioners, this was a big area of concern was, we aren't planning for adequate parking. Canby does not have enough people that live and work in the town to say that, people are going to be walking from their house to their job. The thermometer that you just had up shows that that's not how it's going to be. And so
Okay.
I really think we need to focus on that.
Let me just try to address that a little bit. I don't think we've said, well, it sounds like the city's already adopted something that you might have to kind of backpedal on a little bit in terms of no parking requirements for certain types of mixed-use development in downtown core, maybe. But in other communities, thinking of one, done some work in Tempe, Arizona, very auto-centric environment, created a very proactive shared parking ordinance. So if the developer can show that there's reciprocal agreements with some of the adjacent property owners, you can reduce the amount of parking they're required to have on site. So maybe a shared parking ordinance is a better way to go.
And just to address part of the comment, as part of the comprehensive plan and transportation system plan, it will not be necessarily a deep dive into parking, but there is a scope element that will address parking as part of that analysis, and we'll start to look at at least the ratios for parking that were in our city, which have not been looked at for probably some time. And that would be more on the zone level than like for the entire downtown. And just to the concern, is it just the downtown? Because I didn't see that we were talking about reducing parking elsewhere.
Well, this says specifically downtown, but you're talking about, if memory serves me correctly, when the state decided that they were going to allow people to build duplexes on their property, there's no requirement for them to put parking at them duplexes. And so if you have an entire street, or even if you have half of the streets, property owners that decide to build duplexes and not provide at least one car per dwelling unit, then you've got that many more cars that are parking on the street, and it just doesn't, the math, I mean, I'm dyslexic, math isn't my thing, it doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
I think Beaverton's parking code, I think it's 1.2 spots per dwelling. And so really you end up at the end of the day, 2 or 3 visitor spots on that property, and there's one per unit, right? And so if you're running based on those numbers, you're running 2 people in an apartment, or somebody's got to park somewhere. And so
We use a double park, and only the bumper can go into that 0.2 spot.
So,
The rest is
I think we could probably spend the whole time talking about parking tonight, but just to summarize maybe, so noted on the parking. There's some dynamics obviously involved with that. In the example, dealing with the House Bill 2001 on the duplexes, it would have to meet the same standards as a single family home, but yet it would be 2 spaces because that would be what's required by our code. There are some other elements, and there may be work sessions around this, depending on if it passes or not, but House Bill 3414 it has some fairly sweeping elements that will restrict the cities from doing certain things, and parking is one of those elements that we'll talk more about. But for right now, I just wanted to point back to, at least from a staff perspective, we hear the message, and we understand that parking is an item that's of importance. It's going to be baked into the comprehensive plan, transportation system plan update. So we'll have some more evaluation of that.
So basically, with this piece, are there other strategy pieces that need to be fleshed out, further broken down, or taken away? Or is this enough to work on for the Planning Commission and Council to start putting some action steps underneath these and start to move forward? You turned on yours first. So
Don, I'm involved with some things in Gladstone now too, because I like misery. But they're addressing the exact same thing right now, and they're kind of thinking towards parking structures on each end. So it might be a place to turn to for some what are they doing type thing. But they're doing an overlay zone downtown, and they've got they're actually taking away parking. I'm trying to get into that, but that's a big problem for them, and they're addressing that. This might be a good resource for you.
Thank you.
Councilor Varwig, and then I'll go over to Commissioner Ebert.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say this is already a lot of meat to chew on. So I don't know if we add more, that's, I know we only have a few months to be working through this, right, before we have to adopt it. So I'm hesitant to add too much more, just for the sake of time. So if we need to add more stuff, I don't know if it's possible to extend our timeline, or do we have to do this by state? This is a lot.
This will be going to the Planning Commission and then to Council. And we have some restrictions because we have grants from the state as well, and they have timelines on those for us to get reimbursed. So we really need to have the Council adopt this on the timeline that we've identified to get reimbursed. So that would be coming to the Council on April 19 for housing production. And then the economic piece will come on, I think it was May 5th. Third.
Right. And I know there was some conversation there about updating this more often versus every 225 years. Maybe if we bring this back in a couple years to do more, maybe that's the target is to do this more often.
And I would say on that note, there will be a full vetting of, we're dealing with 3 of these as efficiency measures. The other 6 in the comprehensive plan, and the council and the planning commission will be very involved in developing policies which will further help us implement those items as to your direction on those.
Commissioner Ewert?
Just a couple of quick things. One is on your slide 23, I don't know which slide we're on here now, but you talked about elder housing. Again, I just want to reiterate, we need to really, really look back at what we've done in the past. We've done this in Canby. It didn't work. And then we had to go back, revisit it, and make it so that and I'm talking about the Radcliffe area. Yep. We had a whole bunch of houses in there that they wanted small lots and everything else. We did variances, we changed it, and it didn't fly. And so, I just use that for an example. We really, really, really need to not reinvent the wheel in some of these things that we've already done. We need to look back at why it worked, why it didn't work, and move forward. The second thing is, I am really, really not in favor, and I will strongly push this, is to giving a bunch of SDC money away to builders as an incentive to make affordable housing. That's not going to work. That's not going to get passed on. If they save $100,000 building a house, if they could sell it for $400,000 or $100,000 more, they're going to sell it for $100,000 more. And we're going to be the ones that take the hit on that. So that to me is not an incentive at all. So any of that stuff in our plan, as far as I'm concerned, you can just take your eraser and erase that. That's not going to fly where I'm concerned.
Is that a motion? Because I'll second that. I'll second that. As a contractor, I identify with what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's just, so anyway, that's all I got to say.
That's good. Councilor Patton?
I agree. If there's an array, I'm in the camp to the modified SDC thing. I'm not for that. Because we look at the apartments that were built down here behind Fred Meyer. We were told that they were going to be Sequoia there. We were told that we were led to believe that they were going to be affordable housing. We were led to believe there was, I don't care what anybody says, when I read all those articles, and it was, and as just a regular old member of the community, I was led to believe that those would be affordable housing, and it wasn't. And so I'm not a fan of making Canby cheaper for people. No, I'm for removing that.
Just as a time check, Scott, we do need to reset the room for our meeting. Okay. Councilor Bangs, I'll give you the last comment or question, and then we'll wrap it up.
Thank you. Actually, 2 things here. Number one,
Sorry,
the
you get
housing needs assessments based on the lowest level of expansion, the safe harbor, but the economic opportunity assessment was based on the middle level. Was that something that we decided?
Yes, there was a discussion with council on the safe harbor, and that's very difficult to go against that. No one in the metro area has done that to resist the safe harbor provisions. It would be likely we would be challenged legally if we went down that path.
Okay, I remember that discussion.
So that was part of that.
Right.
On the employment side, I think it's really, the question is, do we stay the course on what we've done in the last 12 years going forward economically? Is that the path we want to go forward with? Do we want that to be higher than the medium growth? Do we want it to be on the low end, which would be lower than the medium growth, which would be the last 12 years? So that really is ultimately that will be the question for Planning Commission and Council is, should we stay the course and go based on our history, or should we do something different?
Right. Thank you. And do we have a cap on how tall we can go in the downtown area?
We do right now.
It seems like if we lifted that cap, we could add that square footage to the amount of acreage that we would need for housing or urban growth expansion for housing.
I believe there is a height limit. I don't have a
4 feet, 64, 65, something
so,
like that.
yeah,
A little bit taller than this.
Yeah, basically the dahlia's at
The
that.
dahlia's capped.
65,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Have we ever discussed raising it?
I think when the dahlia was first being discussed, there was talk of asking for a variance to go above the limit. And then I think with conversation with the council and the developer, we backed it down and to the level that it's at. Because I think it doesn't need to include the HVAC and HVAC screening and the height requirement, it's just the height of the building. And so to meet the space requirement, I think the HVAC is up on top of the building and screened in and whatnot. So it gives that perceived perception that it's taller, but it is, I think, worth a conversation if we want to go taller. I mean, did I
would
capture
and
that right,
that's-
Don?
Yeah, I believe you're correct, and that would be part of that, maybe the future deeper dive on, this is, again, these are strategies that will be further defined, and if that's the direction that the decision bodies want to go in and direct staff to, as part of the comprehensive plan exercise, we can pursue that. That's, part of that discussion.
Great. I appreciate the dialogue and the two groups coming together here this evening. We always talk about needing to do this more often, and I think as we move forward with these approval process, I know the planning commission gets first crack at some of this dialogue, and so I appreciate it, and I know as we get down the road, we'll need to do more of these more often to hammer these things out and make sure that we're all vetting correctly or just having the dialogue about where we're going. So I appreciate it. We'll adjourn the work session until council will start at 7. And if everybody could help reset, that would be great. Evening, Canby. Welcome to the March 1st, 2023 regular City Council meeting. If you please stand for the invocation and then Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight, I'm just take a moment of silence for our men and women in service as our police, our fire and first responders, and our service men and women abroad. Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For those of you that are tuned in, thank you very much. The council did have started the evening with a joint work session with the Planning Commission as we were getting close to finishing up two pretty major assessments for the city. The first one was the housing needs assessment as we're looking forward to developing our new comprehensive plan for our growth here for the future of Canby. And then layering in with that is the economic opportunity assessment as well. So there's a lot of moving parts coming up here with some future planning, and I hope that many of you will get engaged and be involved in the process in the coming months and the next couple of years. So I thank the Planning Commission for coming in on one of their off nights. I think maybe next time, Mr. Archer, we can accommodate them and meet on a Monday night for them in the future. Next on the agenda this evening is citizen input and community announcements. This is the opportunity for the audience members to address the council on items that are not on the agenda. If you are attending in person, please complete one of the yellow testimony cards, which are found on the back podium there as you enter the council chambers. If you are, once I have you filled it out, please give it to our deputy city recorder. I guess actually our city recorder. Yes? Is that, all right. And she will make sure that I get it so that we can give you your 3 minutes to address the council. Staff and city council make every effort to respond to the questions raised during the public comment. If you are wishing to zoom in, please reach out to our city recorder on the day of the meeting by 4:30 so that she can, probably 5 o'clock is normal. 5 o'clock, right? 4:30? All right, 4:30 it is. She has spoken. 4:30, and we will make sure that you get the link to zoom in and address the council. With that, I've got two cards tonight. The first one is Vicki Pounds regarding Canby Kids funding. You want to just come up here, Vicki, and make sure that I think the microphone is on already with the green light?
It is.
Okay.
All right.
And the floor is yours. How are you?
Well,
Good.
isn't that the proper English? Well.
Yes, I'm good. Well, I am well, yes.
All right. Thank you for this bit of time to address the council. My name is Vicki Pounds, and I serve as the Secretary Treasurer on the Canby Kids Board, and I'm representing Canby Kids here to make a short statement and a request on behalf of Canby Kids. Founded in 1975, Canby Kids is a nonprofit organization for sports to provide youth and recreational activities to competitive sports opportunities for youth in and around the Canby area on a year-round basis. Over our 46 years, thousands of kids have participated in their respective sports. The heart of our organization are the volunteers who serve on their boards and coach their teams. We're proud of our record within the community and very much treasure our ability to work as a community partner in Canby. We look forward to many more years of serving the youth. Canby Kids itself has gone through many changes. 46 years ago, a city grant to Canby Kids was able to start up baseball, then softball, and then other sports had joined. We were the start of a city recreational program. With the loss of financial support from the City of Canby in 2000, the board voted to charge a per-player fee to support our admin office. The problem was the indoor sports didn't see the value of financially supporting Canby Kids, and so the indoor sports one by one left the organization. This unintended consequence fragmented youth sports for the parents and players searching for sports options. As Canby grows and the master park plan is done, there's a potential to create a Parks and Recs district that incorporate activities for both youth and adult recreational. We anticipate this as a long process. Then again, there are steps that can be taken now. If Canby Kids could bring into the fold the other youth sports at no additional expense to them, Canby Kids could be ready to join with the City of Canby and the Park and Rec Board plans. In the meantime, Canby Kids would be grateful to have funding from the city to offset the costs that impact the player fees. We are asking to be funded for the admin costs that Canby Kids incurs to operate our organization with $15,000 a year. We believe this will help our sports reduce registration fees and be a huge step for us to continue our service to the community.
Great. Thank you, Vicki. I appreciate you being here this evening. And yeah, I'm very much aware of the history of Canby Kids and the contribution that's been done and for the Canby community. I know that there were obviously funds from the city started up, and I know that not in my recent time, and I think Councilor Patton was also on the council at the time when we did, as a city in our budget, do community grants to a number of organizations, and I believe Canby Kids was one of those. And then we had to, unfortunately, budget constraints for the city. We had to move those funds elsewhere. Scott and I had some conversation with this, and I think it's in lieu of the fact that we don't as a city yet have a recreation department necessarily, and that Canby Kids is kind of the de facto group that handles that. One of the things I think, and I talked with Scott about this and bringing to you all, was as we move into the budget season, if that would be something that we would be interested in at least putting in the budget as a conversation piece for the budget committee to decide if that's something that we can do. The other aspect I know that we have is the community grants that we funded with the last budget that is also available for organizations to apply for. That could be another opportunity for for Canby Kids to apply for. So I just, knowing that this might be coming today or later this month with the budget coming up, so that might be something that we could look at and let the budget committee decide whether that works or doesn't work. So I saw Councilor Davis, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Vicki, for coming. The Park and Rec Committee had this request from Ryan Oliver at our committee meeting, and we urge that somebody from Canby Kids, thank you, Vicki, for coming, come and present this to the council so that all of you can hear this request, because the Park and Rec Committee didn't have any opposition to it at all, and especially for the reasons that you talked about, Mayor, in regards to that we don't have anything going now, and we rely heavily on Canby Kids. And so the Park and Rec Committee was in favor of moving forward with this if the city could find a place in the budget for it.
Okay. Other thoughts, comments?
I was going to actually echo your comment earlier. I definitely believe that this is something that we need to put into discussion for some sort of budgeting for it. I've said it time and time again, we need more for the kids in Canby, especially in the rec area. My son can't decide what he wants to do one day from the next, so if I can implement this into helping him decide what sport or what activity he wants to do, this would be greatly appreciated.
Well, and I think also to keep in mind too that we did budget for the community grant piece in this year's budget, and yeah. I know that we're to the point where that's live and can be applied for, but we also I want us to be cognizant of the fact that that we do, for one, there's a good chance then that this then opens up other dialogue with other groups for similar requests.
Of course.
Just put that out there. Yes, Counselor Patton.
Yeah, I have no problem viewing this for future budgets. But again, to that effect, as far as looking at the overall impact on the budget, you know, where that money comes from, you know, is there then a cut in parks? Is there a cut here? Is there a cut there? Because we usually run on a pretty lean budget. So I am all for seeing if we can scrape some money out of the corners to try and make this happen, whether that's $15,000, whether that scraping is going to yield 15 grand is a tall order, but you know, I guess anything's better than a kick in the face. So I'm for a conversation.
Yes, Counselor Banks, thank you.
I've always been in favor of spending money on kids. I would even be willing to go up to 20 grand and use the other 5 to finance low-income participants in Canby Kids. My kids went through all sorts of Canby Kids programs, but had friends whose families couldn't afford. And it'd be great to see some other faces out there. I'd certainly like to have this conversation.
Okay. Yes, Counselor Barwick.
I just want to jump on the support train. I think it's a great thing. And so I've said a few times that our kids are our future, and it's so true. And if we support them now, it will help them in their futures, and that will help our future. So I'm on board 100% finding a way to support this, maybe putting some kind of parameters or program around it, you know, as a grant possibly, so that, you know, we don't have that, you know, open door to, or open pockets for everybody to say, but, you know, so.
Okay, so I think, so Vicki, thank you for coming, and I think that's really the best I could say right now is that you've obviously got support here for Canby Kids and trying to help with some of the operating costs that the group is running under, and there might be other things that can be discussed as well to help with that. And so we'll at least look at trying to put that in as a budgetary conversation here when we move into the budget cycle here in May. I would say for the Canby Kids group to watch for those meetings and definitely come and attend, because there's a half of the budget committee that isn't here, and so they'll want to hear this ask as well.
Okay.
Cool. Great. Yes.
I would also request the Canby Kids look into assessing parents that yell at the referees and coaches $100 as a fundraising stream as well. Right.
Are you
saying a preemptive swear jar?
Right.
To save my money.
Are you the one?
Yeah. Okay.
We can't set the parents up though, right?
So, Vicki, thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Next, I have Carol Palmer to talk about the Mark Prairie School and Holly Street City Hall. Carol, how are you?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yes. Hey, when I was talking to you at your last meeting about the Mark Prairie School, one of the things that I think you all nodded your head, you understand what's happened to that building. You probably all know how hard Judy Oss and other people are working to get the funds needed to cover what the insurance company is not going to cover. But they've run into a few problems, and in some emails I've been reading, what's happened is the county has been moving the goalposts on them in terms of code requirements. And they've just added another $200,000 to the price of the rehab. You know, the actual restoration, really. And so they're now up to $800,000. Peggy is one of the things that I think what's happened is the planning department, there's been a lot of turnover. It's the same kind of thing that we've had here at the city. We've got new people. The baton is not always being handed off very well. And also, I think some of these new folks don't understand that designated properties are something different. In fact, in Oregon State Code, one of the things you're supposed to, planning commissions and and folks that write codes are supposed to understand, is that the designated properties get some leniency in terms of the code requirements. There is flexibility there, and it doesn't appear that that's happening. So while Peggy takes this on, I'm here to say it's better to have a chorus rather than a solo act. So I'm asking for an informal conversation to just let the county know that the city is indeed in support of this project and is asking that the county follow the state rules and give some flexibility and leniency in terms of the code requirements. I think that just looks like maybe a conversation between one of you or the city administrator with the county administrator, but to know that that support is there, I think will be very helpful for them.
So the county has tacked on a $200,000 additional dollars to this project for you all.
Not up to 800.
Yeah,
For
okay.
code requirements, yeah. And some of those code requirements actually that they're insisting on are such that they are going to decrease the historic integrity of the property. And that's just something you try to avoid any way you can. And there's usually, and in this particular case, I think there's workarounds.
Yeah, this whole project's been pretty amazing to watch, and I know, having had conversation with Judy Oz and
Yeah.
about it, and it's a great project, and
Yeah.
it's really something pretty spectacular.
They're going to turn that into a community center.
Right.
Yeah, so
I know
that
that
makes
they've
it
got
really important.
big plans for that.
Yeah.
That structure and that building. Thoughts, council, on this particular? Yes, Councilor Varwick.
Well, I was just thinking, in the past, we've written letters of support and signed it by the council, and I'd be in favor of writing a letter of support for it and hopefully, those of us on the council that support that would be willing to sign it.
Okay.
Would that require a resolution?
I don't know if it's a resolution as much as it's just a consensus of a letter either from the whole council or a letter from the mayor.
It only requires a general consensus, especially if the mayor wants to sign off on that. But as speaking for the city, as long as there's a plurality of councilors wanting for that message to come from the city.
I'm in favor of that.
Yeah, my whole thought is the more signatures on it, the better.
Yeah, my experience with the Board of County Commissioners, and I know former Mayor Axelrod is here from the second best city to Canby, can attest that the more signatures on a document to the BCC, the better. So I would ask if we do that it be 7 signatures on there versus just mine.
Is it Clackamas County or is that Marion County?
Oh, it's Clackamas County.
Clackamas County, okay.
Oh, yeah.
So, okay, so it seems like we've got a consensus to do, so my ask of you, Carol, the wordsmith that you are, if you would write it or work with someone close to the city. Oh, George Stroh should help write it? Okay. Yeah, so if you wouldn't mind helping to wordsmith that, then we can distribute for signature or whatever, the sooner as soon as we can. So possibly in the next couple of council meetings, when everyone's here, we can get signatures on that.
Sure.
Cool. And then your other item?
Yes, my other item is the Holly Street City Hall. I don't know how many of you have heard of the DeMuro Awards. They're given out by Restore Oregon. In the historic preservation community, they're a big deal. And Peggy Sigler, again, reminded me that the city council or the city hall restoration of the Holly Street City Hall is certainly a candidate for the DeMuro Awards.
Oh, wow.
And so I approached Mary Hanlon, and she was really excited. And so we are working on the application, and there's multiple categories and multiple winners in each category. But one of the things that I really like about the DeMuro Awards is they recognize the team. And so the City of Canby is part of the team. So this would also be an award for the city as well, not just for Mary or the Hanlon Corporation. So I wanted you to know about that. And at the same time, I was talking with Mary also about the designation for the Canby, or for the City Hall. Now, as the two of you would remember, 8 years ago, the original intent was by the city was to have a national nomination or national registry. We had for several reasons to back down on that and go with Plan B, which was the local designation. But I didn't let that go. For 7 years, I've been trying to figure out a way to how do we get that property on the National Registry. And so thanks to the SHPO, they submitted it's called a multi-property designation. And what it is it basically is the foundation for properties that are centered around a central theme. And in this time, the theme is the PWA and WPA properties that were built during the New Deal era. And so what it does, I'm going to tell you that makes it easier, but of course the National Park Service is involved, and so it's a federal project and nothing is really easy. But because the SHPO has done this, it's now much easier to slide a property like our City Hall right into that National Registry slot. We need, of course, owner approval. Mary has said she would do that. It has to meet all of the other same things that everybody else does, which is historical significance, check that box, historic integrity, check that box, 50 years old, check that box. It's really in a good place. The really good news is, and I checked with the SHPO on this, the city, thanks to Joe Lindsay and Brian Brown and what they did back in 2016 and helping us shepherd this through the process at that time, is because we dotted our I's and crossed our T's and followed the process exactly. Nobody on staff has to get involved with this at all in terms of staff reports, public hearings, that's all been done. So we have laid that foundation. So we're really ahead of the game. The only thing we'll need is for somebody on city staff will have to go to the state hearing and just say that the city is in support of this. I don't think that's going to be a problem at all. Then it would go to the National Park Service for final approval. And then we will have a National Registry property in downtown Canby right where we want one, which would be great. So
That would be fantastic.
yeah,
Great work, Carol, thank you.
That is fantastic, Carol. Thank you.
You bet.
Yeah, I guess that'd be a follow-up item. Maybe Scott, Joe, and I can have that conversation and, yeah, see that through. That'd be really great. Wonderful. That's great news. Thank you, Carol. Okay. Maya, did anybody want to zoom in for comment at all? Any community announcements of any kind? Okay. We're going to move into the next item on our agenda, which is the Willamette Falls Heritage Area Coalition presentation.
Great. Well, hello, Mayor Hodson and City Council. Thank you so much for having us here this evening. My name is Britta Mansfield, and I'm the Executive Director of the Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Area Coalition. I'm joined by Russ Axelrod, our Board President, and we're here to just share a little bit about who our organization is, highlight some of our current work, and then let you know how you guys can get involved. I know a few of you are kind of familiar with us, and then you have some newer council members. So Russ and I will be here to answer questions and hopefully have a bit of a conversation once we're through the presentation. Which is popping up right now. Oh, yep, you're fine.
Do you guys have to turn around to see that?
They've got it on the screen over there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Fancy technology.
I like your digs here. That's nice.
Thanks, Russ.
Thanks, Russ. Great, thank you so much. So yep, there we go, that's right. I'm sure many of you know there are quite a few organizations in the area with the name Willamette Falls in their name. But Russ and I represent the Willamette Falls and Landings Heritage Area Coalition, and we are a nonprofit umbrella organization working to establish a national heritage area along a 56 river mile stretch of the Willamette River. We're a partnership of public and private entities, and our board is made up of representatives from local governments, tribes, businesses, heritage advocates, and private citizens. Currently, our paid partners include Lake Oswego, West Lynn, Oregon City, Wilsonville, Clackamas County Metro, the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, as well as PGE. As an umbrella organization, our scope of work is pretty broad. We do, however, have two very large-scale projects that we're currently working on. Our first is establishing National Heritage Area designation, and our second is working with the City of West Lynn to restore their historic City Hall building as a regional cultural center. Both of these projects are going to help further our organization's mission of leading the efforts in the region to enhance, assist, and promote our heritage area. So a little bit, well, I missed our mission and vision, but a little bit on national heritage areas. Heritage areas are designated by Congress as places where natural, cultural, and historic resources combine to form a cohesive and nationally significant landscape. They're a really cool program. I'd encourage you to look them up. They have a lot of resources on their website that's pretty easy to digest. But they leverage federal funding to enhance local economies, largely through revitalization and heritage tourism. So our proposed National Heritage Area follows, as I mentioned, a 56 river mile stretch, roughly from Lake Oswego up to Kaiser. And that includes the city of Canby and all of its wonderful history. So while our pursuit is ongoing, we are working as hard as we can to act like a heritage area and bring a lot of the benefits to our local communities even before we have formal designation. So looking just at our history, some of the stories that we highlight are seen here on the screen. We have a history going all the way back to the Missoula floods and the Ice Age, and following time up through Native American settlements throughout the region, looking at the Hudson Bay Company, and following white settlement out up through the modern day. There's so many stories, and I think they do really form a cohesive landscape of this region and show how this portion of the country has developed and influenced the rest of the nation. And Canby, I'm sure many of you know, has its own significant stories that we want to work to highlight as well. So as I mentioned, achieving National Heritage Area designation is a very long process. So as Carol was talking about it, you have to go through the national government, and that takes a lot of time. So in the midst of that process, we're working on a lot of other local initiatives as well. I mentioned earlier that we've partnered with the city of West Lynn to restore their historic City Hall building and open it as a cultural center. And we really believe that this project is going to benefit the entire heritage area because it will serve as a starting point for heritage exploration, and it will offer some exhibit and meeting space to organizations throughout the region to help them connect with more people. We also work to participate in community events throughout the year, and just last October, we actually celebrated our business community by hosting our Half Century Business Club Awards event right here in Canby across the street at Cutsforth's. And more recently, we have worked, it should be clicking. Yep. More recently, we held a board retreat that really re-energized our group, and we've been focused on our Old Oregon Photos business. This was a really fun acquisition that we got just at the beginning of 2022. We actually received a very generous donation of a large collection of digitally restored historic photos and a business that is completely set up to print them and sell them. So we've been working on that for just about the past year. We've got some great volunteers that have been having a lot of fun with that. So you can check out oldoregon.com or oldoregonphotos.com to view the entire collection. And this is something that will be publicly available at Historic City Hall. We'll be working to maintain the collection and make sure that it remains a publicly available historic resource. And then one of our other newer, more public-facing initiatives is our Digital Heritage Trail. This was a program that was developed in partnership with Clackamas County Tourism, and our trail currently features nearly 30 sites throughout our whole heritage area. And when you go to this website, visitors can see photos of each site, they can read a brief overview, and then they can find hours and contact information so they can either, feel satisfied that they learned something while sitting on their couch, or plan a trip to actually get out into local communities and learn more about the place that they live or the place that they've chosen to visit. We're working to expand this trail and are in the process of hiring an intern to research specifically the history of Chinese communities throughout the region. That kind of links into a theme that we've had for really the last year and a half to focus on telling untold stories and underrepresented stories throughout our communities. So we've kind of focused on the Chinese community as one because we had some connections to it and it was kind of low-hanging fruit for us. But we are expanding this heritage trail to have many more sites and really be a rich representation of the heritage of the area. So as you can see, we have quite a lot of work on our plate, and none of this would be accomplished without the support of our volunteers, our board members, and our partners. And we'd really like to encourage the City of Canby to be involved. We have plenty of volunteer opportunities throughout the year, and we're working on building various committees, and we'd love to have some community participation in those so that our committees are made up not just of our board members, but truly of the people that we want to engage with. And then we'd also like to ask you to consider becoming a paid partner. Our current paid partners contribute between $5,000 and $15,000 annually, kind of depending on where they are in that partnership scale and what fits in with their budget. And these funds go directly towards the work that I've shared with you tonight. And ultimately, they help us steward our proposed National Heritage Area. So I'd like to ask you to consider that, and Russ and I are here and happy to answer any questions. But overall, thank you so much for having us here and listening to this brief presentation.
Thank you both for coming in and giving us this presentation. I know Councilor Hensley has been following this as well, and did you want to make some comments?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you guys for coming. We had a brief email exchange, and I wanted them to come and present to the entire council. This is my most recent liaison assignment, and since most of the council is pretty new and not familiar with your work and Carol's presentations on it in the past. So I appreciate you coming in and kind of briefing everybody so that we're all up to speed on what your work is and what your mission is, and give everybody the opportunity in our town to become involved in it with your presentation. So I appreciate you coming and sharing, and I look forward to coming to your meetings and being able to continue sharing with my colleagues your progress.
Yeah, thank you.
Any questions or comments? Questions or comments from the council at all? No? Okay.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you very much. We appreciate that, and definitely want to make sure that, we need to be involved on some level, and we just got to figure out what that looks like, because it's a huge stretch and we're right smack dab in part of that. So yeah, definitely.
I will say, though, thank you for sharing about the old photos. That's something that I love. I love old photos.
Great.
Of all areas. So I will definitely be on that website, and I will be a customer. So
that's fantastic. We look forward to that.
It is a very cool collection.
It is.
We're very fortunate. And it's in a beautiful studio right now in Willamette, the historic part of West Lynn. And as Britta said, we're going to move it to City Hall eventually. So it'll be a little more publicly available. And people off the street can just kind of walk in and order as well. So that'll be nice.
And that was Old Oregon Photos.
Old Oregon Photo.
Yeah.
And I actually went ahead and found their website. If you go on there, you can actually purchase some of the photos as well. That's something really, really cool to have. I love finding old photos like this. My son loves it as well. I might even purchase them and put them in his room.
They make wonderful gifts. If the city wants to offer gifts, you can line parts of City Hall with historic pictures, which is really nice to do. We've done that all as well up in Westland a little bit, and some other cities have done that.
I don't know if we have a new restaurant kind of out of town as you're leaving town, the Jarbo's Grill, and they've got actually a bunch of old photos from Canby displayed there. So it might be a great spot to stop sometime and check out.
That's fantastic. It's a great program. We hope to actually expand it and offer it kind of as a service to smaller heritage organizations, because we also received all of the equipment to do the digital restoration, and we can be adding new inventory to our sites whenever we need to. So we'd like to offer that as something to smaller museums or heritage groups that have collections but don't have a way to present them or to sell them, and kind of be almost a clearinghouse for them to sell product and get their collections in front of people's eyes. So that's down the road. Great.
I'll just add one little point, is that this year we're hoping to have our legislation together to go to Congress, and so we're about to meet with our new congressional representatives, Lori Chavez DeRemer and Congresswoman Salinas, and brief them on our work, because they're less familiar. Schrader was very familiar. Merkley's offices and Wyden's office are very familiar. So we're going to be presenting to them too soon, and we're hoping to have language and really be promoting that. So, and we're always available. We can come down to town and grab a coffee, grab a meal, grab a beer, whatever is the preference, and fill you in on what we're doing, or if you have more questions and want to learn more about what we're doing or get more involved, we really encourage it.
Yeah, let us know.
Perfect. Yes, Councilor
One final thought, because the county does come to us with the prevention awareness on the first Thursday. So that lovely lady in the mint green jacket, see her before you leave about first Thursdays.
Great.
You could come, and then our community could get to know a little bit about what you're doing and be more familiar with you as they're passing by and can pick up things from your tape.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Great.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you both. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Good to see you, Russ.
Yeah, good to see you.
Next on our agenda is the follow-up report and presentation regarding the city council goals and priorities conversation.
I'll kick
Mr.
this off.
Archer, yes.
Mr. Mayor and Council, we're going to be having by Zoom here Sarah Singer-Wilson joining us from SSW Consulting. There's Sarah. As you know, we did our annual goal setting on February 10th. Sarah helped facilitate that, put together some draft information for you. It's in your packet of what she and her associate captured for what they heard from you that day. This is the first follow-up opportunity to review those with you. Sarah's going to be basically giving you an update on that, kind of talking through that. There's a prioritization exercise that I think she's going to be reviewing with you. In fact, if you're able to access email at the dais, there'll be a link to a polling tool that Sarah's going to be asking you to utilize to help do some kind of in lifetime prioritization as she discusses that. And then, of course, what we'll end up doing is looking to have you finalize or get a final draft of your proposed goals that will eventually come back to you for adoption. So this is not the final action tonight. This is another step towards adopting your goals. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah, unless any of you have any questions for staff before she begins.
No, don't think so. Great.
Evening, Sarah. How are you?
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. As Scott mentioned, we are just going to review the goals, the draft goals briefly tonight. And then there was interest expressed at the end of our retreat to do a prioritization exercise. And so I can see that some of you are already in the link and adding your names, which helps to verify that you're in there and accessing it so that we can move through the polling exercise. So as you pull up that link, go ahead and add your name. And that way, once I see everybody's, we'll be ready to roll with our polling exercise. But before we go there, to make sure we don't need to make any adjustments to it, I want to share my screen and just briefly walk through the goals so that you know what you're going to see in the polling exercise. So here are the draft goals that we developed during the retreat. So there was a goal around promote financial stability, and you all identified 4 objectives there, which was to revisit the city's policy for reserve levels to balance savings and spending, evaluate the city's fee structure, which would include a consideration of sunsetting the park maintenance fee, direction on the street maintenance fee, continuing the planning permit fees to address cost recovery, host a mid-fiscal year joint budget committee meeting, prioritize and allocate ARPA. In the second goal area, you identified several objectives under aligning resources to address future community growth. So the housing needs analysis, economic needs analysis, development code update, completing the update of the comprehensive plan and pursuing an urban growth boundary expansion, an analysis of inclusionary zoning tools to help expand housing opportunities, a workshop to discuss the future of and set goals for the Urban Renewal Agency, review and consider updates to the charter, actively recruit a hotel motel for Canby, and conduct an assessment on current and future city staffing needs. The third goal area is plan a transportation system that eases the impacts of growth, which would include complete objectives of completing the transportation system plan update and the evaluation of county roads in the urban growth boundary to determine the cost and impact of integrating those into your local transportation system. The next goal area is around develop a more robust parks and recreation program aligned with the master plan. And there are 2 objectives: educate the council on funding mechanisms and financing options for parks and recreation development, ongoing maintenance, and then identify and plan for land acquisition. And then the very last goal area was to enhance engagement and communication that represents broad perspectives. So evaluate opportunities for increasing youth engagement, develop the communications and engagement plan, leverage ARPA to update the emergency management plan, gather input on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging from the Clackamas County work, and determine the city's next steps. Conduct a community survey, conduct an employee satisfaction and engagement survey, and appoint a subcommittee to update the council's policies and guidelines. So those were the 24 objectives. And when we get into the prioritization piece, you'll be not prioritizing the overarching goals, but the objectives within each goal area. So before we start this exercise, I can see you guys have all been able to get into the polling, which is great. So before I share the polling exercise and we conduct that, any questions about those draft goals and objectives?
Yes, Councilor Davis.
Just a few notes. Under the promote fiscal stability, the third one down where we talked about having a mid-financial budget, I believe we also added in there a bi-monthly financial report.
And the bi-monthly reports and the staff report, yeah, we did.
Is that the recollection from the rest of the council?
Yes.
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 Okay. All right, so it won't be edited in the polling because that was prepared in advance, but we can edit it in the final document. So it would be to host the mid-fiscal year joint budget committee, and then can you just clarify the addition one more time so I can capture it?
Yeah, it was just to have a bi-monthly financial report.
Okay.
Not a presentation, but just have it included in the bi-monthly staff reports.
Correct.
Yes, okay, I've got that captured. Any other questions about the objectives or the goals?
I was wondering if you could check your notes. I had on my notes that we, under the future community growth, we also had on there in regards to future properties for athletic fields, or did we incorporate that into the Parks Master Plan?
Number 17, identify and plan for land acquisition.
Yeah, but for what?
It doesn't say, it just says under more robust parks recreation program aligned with the Parks Master Plan.
Yeah, so the intent of 17, and you could add language to make it more specific, but it was related to the Parks and Recreation Master Plan and land acquisition for parks.
Okay.
Might I make a suggestion on that one for council to consider is, because I think we're talking about just general parks land in the future, but also I think there was some talking around the need for athletic fields, so maybe something like identify and plan for land acquisition, including future athletic fields, or something like that. So we're saying it not just specifically only for the fields, but that definitely, I think, has a point of emphasis.
Okay, so I added identify and plan for land acquisition for parks and future athletic fields. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or modifications?
Joe, did I see you raise your hand earlier?
No.
No, okay. I think we're good, Sarah.
Okay, well, let's move ahead with our polling then. I'm going to share my screen so that you guys can see the live results. So the next slide here will be this first one, goal 1. And so you should be able to move those around and rank those items. And again, this is a data point as you guys start to complete the exercise to help staff in how they allocate the timelines for these objectives and budget for them. So it's just helpful to know which ones are the council's highest priorities. So whatever you rank first would be considered the highest priority in this goal area.
Live results.
Yeah, so as soon as I see that we have 7 submittals, we'll move on to the next one.
This is pretty cool.
Same kind of used at LC. Oh, wait, you weren't there. Sorry.
Oh, but yeah.
The
Okay, we're just waiting on one more.
There we go.
There we go. All right, and I will send these results to staff after the presentation so that you guys have record of this as well. Okay, next one. Goal 2. So I know there's quite a few in here. And the numbers align with what's in the packet and in the spreadsheet in case it's difficult to read, but hopefully you guys can see those in your polling. Okay, great. I should have had some Jeopardy music queued up for you guys. All right, next one. Let's see, goal 3. This one's around transportation, so just these two.
Even, I mean, it doesn't like, they're about the same.
Oh, I see, there's the little number down there. The 6 to, I was like, how do we know, and there's the little 6, okay.
Oh, I was just watching to see who was. See, I knew one of those.
Oh, okay.
You knew one of those was in first. You're such a smart guy.
Okay, we've got everybody on this one. Next one, goal 4, this is around Parks and Recreation Program.
Did somebody start playing music, Chris?
Okay. And last one. All right, we've got everybody. And that is the end. So next steps for our process, we'll share the results of the prioritization exercise tonight. We'll send that off to staff so that you guys can have the results of that. And then we'll put together your final summary report, just documenting the updates to the council's goals and objectives and memorializing the process that we used. And just before I leave you guys tonight for the rest of your meeting, any other questions or comments on the goals and objectives for the coming year?
No, Sarah, the only thing I would add is this interactive piece here on the fly was pretty neat to be able to do that kind of in the moment. So, yeah, I think that was really
Cool
great
tool.
to kind of see how everything kind of leveled out, based on our conversations and, follow up. So I really do appreciate your partnership with us in streamlining these things here from last year to this year. And so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's far more fun than the dot exercise. So thanks for indulging and playing along. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your meeting and looking forward to getting that report back to you so you can get off and running on accomplishing your goals.
Great.
Thanks,
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you very much.
So have a good night.
You too.
Great.
We should do those more, Scott.
That was fun.
I've saved the program. I won't.
Say that again?
I've saved the program.
Oh, did you? Okay.
You were the same, weren't you in the same session as me? We used that function at the LOC conference. It was a pretty slick tool.
All right.
And Mayor, just to kind of put a cap on that, we'll work with Sarah and we'll get the final report. We did the same last year. We provided you the full comprehensive report that she does. It kind of gives not just the goals, but some narrative to the process and all that. And then, but we will bring back again that essentially what is like a one-pager, very similar to what we did last time, and that'll be updated and you'll actually adopt that, or we'll ask you to adopt it, and assuming that it's all there for you as soon as we are able to get that back to you.
Perfect. Thank you, sir. Next on the agenda this evening is the approval of the consent agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the consent agenda that includes the minutes of the January 18, 2023 City Council work session and regular meeting, the meeting minutes of the February 1st, 2023 City Council work session and regular meeting, and the appointment of member Jack Pendleton to the Canby Utility Board for a term ending February 29, 2024.
Second.
Motion has been made by Council President Hensley and seconded by Councilor Farwig to approve the consent agenda, which includes the January 18th, 2023 City Council work session and regular meeting minutes, the February 1st, 2023 City Council work session and regular meeting minutes, and appointment of member Jack Pendleton to the Canby Utility Board for a term ending February 29th, 2024. Comments or discussion? Yes, Councilor Bangs.
I just wanted to say I appreciate how much we're catching up on the minutes. That we're no longer like 6 weeks back, and I think that's great. I just wanted to thank you guys, whoever's responsible for it over there. Thank you.
Great. Yes.
And I just want to take an opportunity to say I was happy to see Jack Pendleton apply for the Canby Utility Board position, and that board will now be filled. So I'm super excited about that.
No, I appreciate, I know there's been a lot of recruiting by many of you up here to get people to join some of the boards and committees that you're liaisons to, and so I appreciate the outreach and getting that engagement going, so thank you for that. And Councilor Patton and I, with Canby Utility Board Chair Melody Thompson, interviewed Jack, and many of you might know Jack from the Budget Committee for the last couple of years, and longtime community member, and yeah, it's definitely in his wheelhouse, and so I think he'll be a great addition to the Canby Utility Board. So perfect. All those in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? That carries 6-0. Next up is resolutions and ordinances. Just a change under that this evening. We're actually going to be pulling resolution number 1381 this evening. The resolution signaling the city's commitment to fund a proposed outdoor fitness court at Legacy Park. And I'm going to have Scott and Joe maybe expand on why we're tabling that for this evening.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll start, and then Joe, you can fill in for me. So we had put on this agenda a resolution regarding the proposed outdoor fitness court at Legacy Park. This was a grant from the National Fitness Campaign that our Parks and Recreation Advisory Board had helped to initiate and work on, and then our staff ended up actually writing a grant and again working with our Parks Board and promoting this idea. So what this is about is this is just a process issue that we need to go back and fine tune our process a little bit. So the granting company asked the city for a resolution. It was kind of a boilerplate resolution that our staff forwarded to this agenda. Mr. Lindsay hadn't had a chance to fully review that because he was taking a few days off and when the agenda was being posted. But we've realized that the resolution itself does not comply with our own city's requirements of anything over $50,000 has to be done by ordinance, as you all know, and there's also some state procurement rules that with thresholds of the purchasing price that we need to follow some procedures to make sure that we're doing this right, crossing our T's, dotting our I's. So what we're going to do is we've already initiated a process of telling this company that wants to grant this, they want to grant part of the cost of this to the city, that we need a little more time so we can get our information straight so that we're doing a proper procurement. We're going to bring that back to you in some form, and I think that's kind of my piece of it. But just to, and Joe can talk a little bit more about that, we may need to ask for a sole source type of a contract, which is not something we do very often, if ever, but we're reviewing that. But just some assurance that the hard work of the Parks Board and the staff is not in vain. We're gonna bring this back in some capacity. We just have to do it in a manner that fits with our own procurement procedures with the city and also with our state procurement rules. I don't know if you have anything else you want to say, Joe.
So I guess my question on this then is obviously creates a little bit of a time delay in execution of this feature to Legacy Park. Does this, I guess, jeopardize our chances of being able to actually see this come to fruition?
I hope not, and I don't think so. The company had asked for basically they've asked for a pledge or a commitment. That's what the resolution is by the end of March. That's not, again, there's some nuance to this. That's not really, for us, the resolution wouldn't commit us to purchasing anything because that doesn't meet our own threshold. So that's where I'm saying we're asking the company to extend that timeline and give us a little more time. We do have another meeting in mid-March, so we have another meeting this month. If we had to, if it was absolutely critical, we could consider bringing some recommendation to you, like an emergency ordinance or something like that if we really had to. I don't sense that we're going to need to do that. I think we'll have time. There's a couple of components of this too. It's the piece that the company provides, which is essentially the fitness equipment, and then there is the groundwork that we were going to do in-house anyway. So basically putting in a concrete pad for the equipment to be installed on. We were going to, our Public Works and Parks team were going to do that piece anyway. So that piece of it is not tied up in this issue with our purchasing and procurement. That's our own work anyway. So we could, if we wanted to, and if we thought that this was going to move forward, we could just do that work ourselves. Because I know there were some timing issues about getting that done in the spring so that in the summer the installation of the equipment would be ready to go. That part of it is not in jeopardy because if we're doing something ourselves, it's not tied up to the contract of a purchase of equipment.
Okay. Councilor Patton, question?
Is there a way to get confirmation from these folks by the end of this week or the middle of next week that if we do delay this into the next month, that it's not going to jeopardize this?
Yeah, I asked staff to reach out today, so hopefully we'll know something in the next couple days.
Okay, so that way if push comes to shove and we have to have some sort of emergency thing, there's ample time to get that squared away. Okay.
Yes, that's in motion.
Yes, Councilor Davis?
Is there a way, if where the council's at today in regards to whether or not, if we would pass this resolution, of course we can't, but with that, that you could write a letter to them and explain where the city made their mistake and didn't follow the procedures, but the general thought from council is that we do want to move forward with this and get something in writing to them?
Yeah. If that's the consensus from council, which I sense that it is, but you can kind of give that consensus to me. But so Councilor Padden's question a moment ago, we've already reached out to them, or we're in process of doing that, but we could add to that some additional language that says that, essentially our council has consensus that they want to proceed with this project, and they've given in a public meeting, they've given a formal, kind of a consensus of that intent. I don't know that that's legally binding, and I would look to Joe to give any advice there, but I think the intent, that's what really, the point of their resolution was really to give intent that we wanted to do this project because they've offered a grant. That was the whole point of the resolution anyway. So I think if you're giving that's kind of what they were looking for. We still have to follow, we're required to follow our procurement policy, so we would need to find the right way to do that. But that was the whole point of it, is sort of like a commitment that the city said, we would like to do this, we'd like to accept your grant, but we have a process that we need to follow to do that. So.
Well, and to be clear, the paperwork that they put in the packet also required us to basically have something like a purchase order, which we cannot do an expenditure over $50,000 without an ordinance by charter. So we can't get around that.
Yeah. So, I guess does the contact made with still doing, we're doing our due diligence, still want to move forward? Is that enough, or do we want a more formalized letter to this company to say?
Well, I think a letter from the city administrator to them, that our intent is to make this happen. It's just that we had we have to go through our process.
Yeah. Yes, Councilor Bangs, I'll come back to you.
Given that we have another meeting before the deadline, I recommend that we wait until we have the actual ordinance that we can debate properly. Since we're not really debating the resolution it has listed, since it violates our charter. So I think we should hold off.
So do you hold off on what?
Well, we're going to
hold off on indicating that we support it.
Well, I think the piece is not necessarily supporting, but that we as a city are still interested in moving forward. So what you're with the conversation of moving forward. I mean, that. But
I mean, are we interested in discussing it at the next meeting?
Well, I guess it'd be a matter of when we get.
Well, as far as like an agenda item, you're allowed to discuss the agenda item and not necessarily take action on the item, but actually any conversation that flows out of that, the public's been made aware that you can talk about it. Is that, you see what I mean as far as like agendas go? But we can, in short order, get an ordinance created for next time for discussion purposes as well, and or for adoption. But yeah, the company itself, we're going to probably try a multi-prong approach, which is to say please and pretty please, and just explain that in their packet they seem to assume that everybody on the planet just uses resolutions to adopt purchases, which doesn't account for us, because we over 50,000 have to have an ordinance. So a lot of other places, they're basically saying promise to pay.
Right, and I guess my summation here is that was shared with this company to say, here's the snag that we run into, here's what we need to vet and still do and bring back to the council in the form of an ordinance. That wrinkle plus the wrinkle of direct sourcing versus an RFP process.
And
Well,
that,
yeah.
that is, that was
That has
the,
to be something that you guys determine and vote on too, is whether, you have to declare that it's a sole source.
Okay, Counselor Patton?
So the reason for my question was, if city staff can get an answer from them by the end of this week or the first part of next week to say, it's okay if you get it to us in March or whatever, that's great. Then we don't have to rush it. But if they say it's at the end, we need it by the end of the month, no questions asked, then we can have it on the next agenda. That's why I asked if we can get that confirmed within the next few days, great. If not, then we have ample time to do it as a hot rush.
Does that satisfy your comment there, Counselor Banks, as well?
Yeah, no, that's what I wanted.
Okay. Is that, okay.
yeah, that's good.
Council President Hensley?
Thank you. My question refers to the RFP process. The way I look at this quote that we have in here, and it does say quote, the grant looks to me like just a discount off of a purchase, not a grant where we would get, oh, we have this money we can use, and we go out for an RFP process and get the best deal out there and use apply the grant to that. They're just offering us a discount off their services. So I'm not sure I'm really sold on this whole idea in the first place without the proper process of RFP. I would like to have a deeper dive into this whole project.
I will be happy to provide further analysis for you as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe, that's why we have an attorney. Yeah. Yes.
Just point of order too, this was highly recommended through the Parks and Rec Committee, which we asked for citizen input on this, and they highly recommended it.
Yeah, it's a great piece of equipment for sure to add over to Legacy Park, and I had the same heartburn over.
Thank you.
It's
not a grant, it's just we get a discount. It's what it looks like. But I think we have an RFP process that we should follow, should we not?
well, I guess there's a lot of dialogue for something we're
Sorry.
tabling until we get more information to be able to do. But
Hence the
yes,
tabling.
when it comes back from the tabling session, we'll have that dialogue about sole sourcing versus RFP. And, because we think that there are other companies that do this type of thing. And so is that, they were the ones that reached out. We looked at it, we liked it, we're moving forward, right? So, but I guess more to come sooner or later.
Again, just to confirm and make sure it's clear, we're in the process. We've already initiated working on following up with the company to talk about the timeline, whether that was we would love to have something from you by this date, or if it was, we can't work with you if you don't have something by the end of March. We'll confirm that. We'll bring back the discussion accordingly, and it may be next meeting, or depending if it's not that much of a rush and we have time to figure this out. There is some I think some questions that need to be answered that we'll work on, we'll give you the information and the options that you have to address this.
Your usual due diligence and staff report with recommendation, the usual fare.
And as happy as all these people are in this presentation to hear that, I'm okay. Look at these happy people. They're just having a blast.
Council President Hensley.
One last question. I might have missed it in the packet. Where's the March date come from? Because on the quote, I see an expiration date of July 7th.
That's in a separate that's just in some staff correspondence that we received, that they were, again, I'm not sure if it was a demand or a request that in order to get this grant/discount, that it was by the end of March. That was a correspondence that we received as staff.
So the July 7th is just for our reference, or what's the
that's-
real date then? Is it July or March?
The July date, I believe, I'm not sure exactly where you're looking at. I think that's,
Expiration date on the quote.
That might be for the quote itself.
Yeah.
A lot of companies, whenever they give you a quote, the quote expires.
I think that's an expiration for the
For cost increases in materials.
which is why.
I wonder if we could just discuss this when it comes up next.
That's fair. Councilor Banks has a good point. Well, that was just why we're talking about March, but yeah, it sounds like we're going to have a lot more answers in the
Since
next
it's
staff
March,
report.
I say
Thank
March
you.
forward.
March forward.
Great.
Thank you.
So tabled. Thank you. Item B tonight is consider ordinance number 1594, an ordinance prohibiting camping and reducing other miscellaneous offenses to violations. First reading, Mr. Lindsay and Chief Tro.
Yeah. So Tro was signaling that unless there's questions, he wouldn't mind just sitting there in the audience. This is an ordinance that we're presenting to you at first reading to change, to add a camping ordinance. And with that, trying to add an ordinance that actually comports with current ORS law that's going to be active as of July 1. And also the way case law, or the way law works, right, is that there's statutory law and then there's case law. And so we have to both meet what the statutes say and then also what the case law says. And so the cases here are the Martin v. Boise and the Grants Pass Blake case. And so the long and the short of all of that is that any ordinance that we pass can't be cruel and unusual punishment for sleeping or what's goes along with sleeping, which is shelter and staying warm and such. So, and the real attempt is to make sure that we don't run afoul of reasonableness as far as our time, space, and manner in which we try to regulate this. We've had 2 workshops on this, and we've tried to incorporate every comment that came during those workshops. So we're presenting this to you, along with just a quick change to a couple of our miscellaneous offenses, just to make sure that they say that they're only violations, because a few of them actually are almost on point with this case law as well, which is obstruction of sidewalks is a good example. That kind of goes hand in hand with what we're talking about as well. So the idea was to kind of make sure and just really show that we're decriminalizing those statutes as well. And then otherwise, there was one other parks one that had to do with drinking in the park. And that kind of goes along with this notion that in the summer, because we're turning things into violations here, in the summertime, we have permitted all activities in the parks. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of treating all of these situations similarly. So alcohol in the park is treated similarly across our ordinances, and that we're treating everything like behaviors similarly. So that's where we're at.
Well, I appreciate yours and staff and also Chief Tro's quick turnaround on anything. I know that it's been, there's a lot of conversation amongst a lot of the cities about this right now. And so I appreciate the hard work in getting this turned around in conversation. So any questions for staff? Yes, Councilor Davis.
I appreciate the work that you and Chief Choro have done on this and incorporating the notes that I have sent in regards to adding in under number 4, talking about operable vehicles. The one thing I'm still wondering about is that they have somebody that can operate the vehicle that is licensed, because I know some of the ones on Pine Street, it wasn't registered, it wasn't operable, and they didn't have anybody with a license. So if you're going to have to move the vehicle, obviously you've got to have a license.
Well, but that doesn't flow from camping. It does flow from the driving, and so there's a violation for driving something without a license. You know what I mean? So you can give them 2 tickets, one for improperly camping and then one for driving without a license, if that makes sense.
Bit of a catch-22 there.
Yeah.
Well, here's the answer though, is that just because you're camping and you're in your car doesn't mean you have to drive it. You could have a buddy come over and move it for you.
Well, in the morning though, when you're moving the vehicle, because you have to move it right now 1 block, which is going to be my next point, but you still have to have a license in order to move it regardless of how far you're moving it.
Okay, but I guess the point is, if they move a car and they own a car and they don't have a license, then they'll get a violation of driving without a license. If they
if they pick a buddy to move it for them, say somebody's sleeping in there, you know what I mean? Just because their name's on the title doesn't necessarily mean they're in violation of our camping ordinance unless, you see what I mean?
Right.
Because if they can figure out a way to move it,
Right.
a good Samaritan might come along and move it for them, I don't know.
Gotcha.
I get that. Yeah, thank you. And then the other part was the one block or one street every 24 hours. I really prefer not having that as the one block because they play that game on Pine Street right now by moving it up one block. You know, and if they're going to be having to move because they're camping, I would like to see that at least 1 mile from that current location rather than one block.
And that's up to the council. Again, the trick here is reasonableness and what you think as far as like what you're making folks do, and then how do we enforce that as well? Say they move it a half a mile, are we gonna like track them down versus like, you know, versus knowing kind of the area and knowing they were here last time, and I don't know if you want to make it out of the vicinity, but that's it's better if there's a particular measurement that we can actually quantify, because what's interesting about this is there's a difference between the enforcement of this, which is trying to prove exactly what folks do when they violate it, and because we still have to come in and we have the burden of proof on what they did or didn't do. So a mile makes it hard for our code enforcement to even ever track that down. You know what I mean? So if you say a mile and they go 600 feet around the corner and then nobody complains about it, it's going to be one of those issues where
Well, and I'm not hung up on the distance as much as I am to
get out of the area.
Yeah, because what they can do, what they're doing now is just getting out and pushing the car up one block. And so if it has to be operable, well, they're going to say, well, I'm just going to push it up. I don't need to start it up. You see what I'm saying?
Realistically.
So, and that's going to avoid motor homes that are not working and red cars hooked up to a green van with a strap, you know, those type of things.
Yeah.
Council Patton had his hand up, and then I'm going to go here and then over there.
So I think we are starting to get into the scenario where we are adding in layers that a court could find are more penalistic than not. Like, if we start adding in more fine details of, well, you can't do this, you can do that, I think, in my opinion, and based on what I've read of this stuff, it starts to open the city up to liability of getting caught in not trying to adhere to the spirit of what the state is shoving down our throats, if that makes sense. So I understand. I agree that the block is a good measurement. That is something that our code enforcement agent can easily document. And if memory serves me correctly, like in the Pine Street scenario, the way this is written is they wouldn't be able to park and camp on Pine Street to begin with because it's near a residential area. Mm-hmm. It's going to be they're ultimately going to have to move into the industrial park. And so that impact on the community that I think some are trying to achieve by adding in more layers will essentially have been met by the one layer that they're not allowed to camp on public property that is adjacent to a residential zone.
I agree with you, Jason, other than the fact that we already did that by saying one block.
So, I mean, I don't know if there's a consensus.
I would say leave the distance out of it. They just have to move.
Well, that could be an inch.
Yeah, hang on. I got you, Joe. Yeah, Council President Hensley and I'll.
Well, and this little sentence is the one I'm still hung up on as well. And is moved at least one block or one street every 24 hours. I mean, it's one block or one street is already kind of ambiguous. I think it should just be to a different area, a different street. Yeah. You're not on Pine anymore. You're not. I mean, we have the one motorhome that parks by the church, and then we see him at Safeway, and then we see, I mean, I don't have a problem with that guy.
He moves quite often.
Yeah, he moves quite often. So I'm thinking that we change that language and take the one block out and just simply say to a different street. Are you good with that, Jim?
Yeah. Counselor Banks?
I had 2 points. One, on this one, I'm just going to pose a scenario. Say my homeless brother parks his van in front of my street, but he eats in my home and uses the bathroom. He just sleeps in it. To make him move a long ways away is going to encourage him to pee in the street. And that's going to encourage increasing the problem that I believe that the ordinance is trying to address. Just food for thought there. And just for the record, my brother is not homeless. But the other point is, and I had a question regarding under the prohibited camping, A subsection 3, where it says any street that borders any residential zone is considered residential. So let's say I live on Redwood. Well, Redwood's miles long. Oh, yeah. So I wonder if it should say adjacent to, or do you see my point? Is a street, it can go forever. So
Yeah. It's the street that is adjacent to the zoning.
Okay, and that would be implied in the way the wording is. Then I'm fine with that. Okay.
Because zoning does end and change along the street.
Okay.
Yeah.
Counselor Maldonado?
You know, I agree with Counselor Patton. There may be a lot of this language that is possibly setting us up for somebody to come down and give us the big old hand, but at the same time, I don't believe that we should be playing this as soft as everybody else is. The point of this is to deter it, not to stop it. It's to deter it. Make it harder, not impossible.
Right.
Let them move a street away. If they're family and they're camped outside your home, bring them inside and let them sleep.
Put their van in your driveway.
Put their van in the driveway. It's not just one person. It's a whole neighborhood that's being affected by this. You park on Pine, there's a whole neighborhood that's being affected by that. Not only that, but it's ugly. You want to keep Canby a garden city? That's not going to be garden-like, is it?
It's that livability piece, and I hear that.
I'm not saying that we have to make it impossible for them to be able to camp or anything like that. But they still have to abide by the same laws we do. Vehicles still have to be registered. If they're going to be on the street, they have to be registered. Domicile or not. We all pay rent. Some pay taxes on property taxes. We have to abide by the law. We cannot make exceptions.
Yeah.
The minute we start making exceptions, it's going to open up a door.
Councilor Maldonado, I agree. I think looking back at the purpose, right, was to create a deterrence, but also to give Canby PD the teeth that they needed and parameters to be able to help detour the camping. So
and we still have the resources. We can still send them to where they need to go if they need help. It's not like we're saying, no, do not come here. We're saying if you're going to come here, it's not going to be as easy as you think. But we're going to help you.
Okay. All right. Council President Hensley, you had something else, or?
Councilor Maldonado pretty much covered it. Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Patton?
I do have two notes that I had.
Microphone.
Oh my gosh, yes. I do have two notes that I had written down here before all of the discussion. First one was, in the staff report, it says that there is no cost impact on the city, but there could be a cost gain in the infractions. I disagree with that. I think there is going to be a cost impact on the city because, as I've said before, we are going to need to implement this rule evenly across the entire city. And so the police department and the code enforcement agent is going to have to spend more time driving around the city and recording and marking and determining what vehicles do or don't fall into this scenario. And so and whether we have to store equipment and catalog equipment, that's going to take staff time. So I disagree that this isn't going to have a cost impact on the city. The other one is, has there been any thought, and this comes up, I actually had heard a news story earlier today about Bend has done this process, and I went to their website to try and find a copy of their the legislation that they've put in. And it had mentioned something about, the people who were impacted had no, it was kind of a media thing where, they interviewed someone that was impacted and they had no advance notice and yada, yada. Is there a way for us to inform, obviously it's not a lot of people, we've talked about that, but to give them a heads up that this is coming, and give them some advance notice so that, that sort of statement can't be made about us and the city.
Well, so part of the process of changing an ordinance is there is a public process.
Sure.
And so this is part of that process. And then the other piece of this is well, let me, I guess, address the very first thing you said, which is cost impact, which, and Tro can attest to this, Chief Tro can attest to this too, which is currently our code enforcement goes out and handles each one of these all the time anyway. And it, part of our job, being civilized is very expensive, right? We hire people full-time to try to get people to follow rules and comply. Mm-hmm. So, and this is not, that's why I kind of presented some of the material too, that is a lot of the crimes that still can be committed and can then be charged and prosecuted, this is actually not the super egregious treatment of anything, right? This isn't really truly that punitive at all, and that's the point. It's a violation, and it's a smaller violation. So it is another tool, and it protects our parks and our cemeteries and our public safety buildings and stuff like that. And then it also protects our residential areas. So it's another tool that if they're not doing the other stuff, they, can at least be handed a ticket and said, you can't be here. I know our police can use their discretion, maybe at first as well. Maybe for repeat people, they've been coached how many times about you can't be here, you can be here. But this is still awareness for folks who are houseless and camping. Is a sticky wicket anyway, because they move around, they're transitory, as if they're probably watching this video right now. But also, half the time they end up on private property. They don't even necessarily study where public property is versus private property. And so right away, half the time it's a trespass, and they have to be warned to either move along, or you get a hold of the property owner, and then now you have the crime of criminal trespass too. So all of this is to say, this isn't supposed to be a draconian response to this. This is yet another tool, and it's actually supposed to be a reasonable tool that promotes the protection of our parks, cemeteries, public safety buildings, and residential areas, if that helps. And I don't know if you have more to say.
And I'll just add about the education piece. We've already given notice to people in our town that this is coming. And that's part of our job, is to educate on new laws and new ordinances. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I'm not questioning the spirit of this. I was just saying that there's not going to be an increased cost. That's it.
Yeah.
I have no problem with it. That was just my take on it. The last bit was with, I don't know if it's possible for, oh gosh, yes, the microphone. I don't know if it's possible as. Everything you just said. No, it's fine. I don't know if anybody else on council is interested in this, but as other cities implement their own ordinances, if we can have a pulse on that and maybe get copies of what they put out so that we can track what they're doing to ours. And then after, 6 to 8 months or 12 months, maybe we need to then go back through and look at this and see if there's maybe things that we can draw from those.
Well, I'll even give you a better timeline, which is once this implements and then once July 1st comes around and the statute that we have to comport with goes live, then there's a feature of that if people give us a 90-day warning about the constitutionality of ours, we know that they're going to challenge it. And the reason they would give that warning is so that they can potentially get their attorney fees paid for. That's in the statute. So what'll probably happen is right around July 1st, a lot of cities will probably be getting that letter. And at that point, I will certainly bring the matter back to you to discuss and see where we're at. And there'll probably be more you never really want to be the test case on these things, but somebody's going to be a test case. So then I will also bring it back at that point too. Yeah.
Council President Henley.
Well, I was just going to ask a question that everybody's going to laugh about. A lot of these ordinances you bring us have an emergency clause on them, and this one, despite all of the public outrage about it, at least in the Pine area, there's no E-clause on here. Is it because of the July 1st date, or is there a reason why we're not going to put the emergency clause and have it effective on passage?
If you want to have an emergency clause, just let me know and pass it as amended for that. Also, if you want to pass it as amended, if you're so inclined, with the excising the one block and just do the one street, let me know as well. And if you're making your motion, then you probably want to make a motion to say as amended with an emergency clause and with the excising of that.
Well, before I make that motion, I guess I'll just take the temperature of the panel here on the E-clause, because I'm not usually one for it, but I
Really?
would,
I'm shocked.
I would accept it in this case.
No.
I know, but I would accept it in this case. I'm not going to fight on the mat about it. If you don't want it, that's fine, but I'll throw it out there.
I do have one more question for staff before you throw out your motion with an emergency clause for the first
Well,
time
I'm still
ever
taking
in the history
is there a
of.
consensus that you're interested in passing it and having it effective on passage rather than waiting till July 1? Hearing none, I'll amend my amendment, and then I'll let you ask your question, then I'll make my motion.
So, Chief Tro, we did manage to get you in the seat, which is good. The conversation component of the movement of said vehicle, whether that's a block or it's a mile, impact on enforcement for the PD?
No, I don't think so. I mean, the biggest thing is that they move, right? So if our code enforcement checks and they're moved, right? I mean, I think the street is a good idea. I mean, a block, like let's say if it's Pine Street, if they just pushed it 100 feet, that's not a block. I mean, it has to be a physical block or a street over. So either one I think is fine, just as long as they're moving.
Okay. Great, thank you.
Oh, another question.
Yes.
Is block even defined? I mean, some blocks are longer than others.
No, and so that's why there's a kind of an option of either a block or a street. Because sometimes, streets also, you could be parked right next to an intersection and just go boop, over to the next street, and that would be very short as well.
I think a block is defined by intersection.
Yeah.
Correct. Intersection to intersection would be one block.
Sure. My point is that they're not all equal.
No.
A New York City block is much different than a Canby City block.
Right. I would in many ways.
Yes.
I would recommend if the goal is to deter, that you go with this, and then if you feel like you need to change it, I'm not very happy with it anyway. That's why I'm saying if you feel like it, I don't intend to vote for it, but. It's certainly possible we can change it down the road. If we find that rolling the car forward 100 feet is not having the desired effect, then we don't have to retype it and have it come up for yet another reading. That's where I'd go.
Yeah, I agree with, I mean, there's the piece, and I go back to the deterrent piece that Councilor Maldonado said. I mean, moving in a block every day is going to be a pretty cruddy thing to have to. No?
They're doing it already.
All right, then I'm going to.
Yeah,
Mr. Mayor?
They're doing it already.
I'd like to make a motion.
Okay.
I move that we adopt or pass, we don't adopt till next time. I move that we pass ordinance number 1594, an ordinance prohibiting camping and reducing other miscellaneous offenses to violations with the amendment to 9.25.20 prohibited camping, section 4, to change the language to say, as is moved at least one to a different street every 24 hours. That's my amendment.
Wait a second.
I think Jim, or either, I don't know who was first.
I think Jim was.
Okay, so motion is made by Council President Hensley to pass ordinance number 1594, an ordinance prohibiting camping and reducing other miscellaneous offenses to violations as amended in the motion, and then seconded by Councilor Davis. Any further discussion? Yes, Councilor
I
Maldonado.
would like to see some language in there about registration and
It is, I think.
insurance. I didn't see that in there. Yeah.
Registered vehicles is in there.
I must have skipped right over it.
Yeah, vehicles and insurance are
Okay.
both in there. So, good, we got that done. Yes, Councilor Banks.
I just want to make an observation.
I saw it.
Tracy's amendment has the benefit of spreading the love around. I also live in the neighborhood near Pine. It's on one of our walking loops. And so if they have to move to a different street every day, then it's not just Pine Street that has to deal with it. So there's that side benefit, I suppose. On the other hand, when you have your walking loop and you plan to not go by that particular street because that's where all the homeless people are parked, you'll be surprised when they are in a different street. Just an observation.
There's a joke in there somewhere, but I'm not going to.
No, I don't. I mean,
No.
this is really kind of a whole sad thing.
It is. I agree.
Okay, I'm having trouble finding it now too. I thought I saw it in here. Joe, can you point us to the registered vehicle point?
I believe it's just parentheses in that vehicle section.
I was skimming it really fast. I'm probably passing over it.
It's number 4. There's a
Oh, there, to
parenthetic
include current registration.
Okay.
Yeah, it's actually literally above the sentence I amended. I missed it.
Okay. So
Thank you, Joe.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
One question. If you're not camping in a vehicle that is not currently registered, that's still okay, right? As long
No,
as you're
that's
not
still
driving it.
illegal. Yeah.
You can't park a car that's not registered? I don't think that's true.
Not on the city streets, no. You cannot.
If you're on, yes.
That's correct. If it's on a public road, you
Yeah.
cannot park an unregistered vehicle. It's a citation, it's a violation.
Okay.
Well, so technically, this would be 2 citations at once. If you were camping in it as well, then you would get a citation if it was not registered for that, and then for the registration as well.
And this goes back to my conversation about how this could create a cost, and that I'm sure that there are cars that are currently parked on city streets from time to time that aren't registered, that people are working on, that you probably don't nail, which is fine, but now those people will have to be cited for those vehicles, because we will have to implement this evenly across the board.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment. We don't catch all violations, right? I mean, there's plenty of violations that we don't catch. It's also officer discretion. The other thing on parked vehicles for registration, we have to actually find the owner, the registered owner, to give the citation to. So it's not something we commonly do. If it's driving, right, then the owner or the registered owner is in the vehicle, so it's easier to track down the owner and give them the citation. So,
Yeah, I'm just trying to drive home the fact that people are going to want to sue over this, and if some crafty lawyer finds out that I park a truck without a registration on the street as a city councilor, and I don't get cited, but a homeless person who has an unregistered vehicle does, that's where they get their loophole. So that's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, the law is the law.
Luckily, all my vehicles are registered.
So now George is going to send everybody by our houses. Thanks, Jason.
There you go.
Yes, Scott, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Council, I just wanted to make a clarification to be sure it was clear that that this, if you pass and adopt this ordinance at the next meeting, since you're not doing an emergency clause, that would then go into effect 30 days after the adoption. Not July 1st was reference to a state law, the new legislation. So just to be clear, your ordinance would
Mid-April
go
then.
into effect about mid-April if you adopt it at the next reading.
And that gives the public 30 days to come yell at us if they don't like it. I'm good.
Okay. All right, so question has been asked and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye or nay?
Okay, so that passes 5-1. Thank you all. Thank you, Chief and Joe, for the work on this.
Nice work, you guys.
Yeah. Thank you. Moving into mayor's business, just a couple of things. So Clackamas County Coordinating Committee is tomorrow. Just to let you all know, and I will send you the link probably tomorrow, the congestion pricing environmental assessment has been published, and the window for feedback is now open. And so have a look at it, read it if you, as you wish. City staff and myself, mostly city staff, has already gone through and formulating some questions and concerns about the environmental analysis of the impact that the congestion pricing on 205 is going to have. West Lynn has, I believe, filed lawsuit against the Oregon Department of Transportation about the environmental analysis not being thorough enough, or it's a very surface level environmental analysis. There's a deeper analysis that West Lynn is, I guess, taking legal action that ODOT pursue, and the Board of County Commissioners is also taking that path as well. And so read it if you wish. Know that staff is working on it, I am working on it, and as are all the cities basically along the corridor that are going to be impacted by the tolling and the diversion piece that will come with it, Canby being one of those cities. So obviously a ton is going on with that. I think, Scott and I were talking earlier this week, yesterday, so yeah, earlier this week, about just in its own right, the amount of meetings that are going on right now around the congestion pricing. And there's a number of bills right now in queue trying to either change it, stop it, delay it, whatever. So there's a lot of moving pieces on that. So I will do my best to keep everyone in the loop on that one. And that's really all that I have right now. Thank you to Council President Hensley for filling in for me this weekend for the Iwo Jima Memorial Remembrance Ceremony. I appreciate that very much. Thank you.
It's always an honor to attend that.
Yeah.
To participate was wonderful.
Good. That's all I have. And we're going to start down there with Councilor Davis this evening.
We're changing it up.
Thank you, Mayor.
You're very welcome.
Anyway, and thank you. The Chamber of Commerce Legislative Committee met today, and the mayor joined us to talk about the polling issue, and the Chamber Legislative Committee is opposed to it as well in regards to the polling. So we're following the legislation on that as well. So, but I wanted to thank the mayor for coming on our call and giving us an update from what the cities are doing with that as well. On the Park and Recreation front, the Park and Rec Committee is hard at work and doing a great job. Thank you, Barry, as our chair of the committee. The Locust Street Park update, the canopy is in. They've done a really good job with putting the tables underneath the canopy. So we're getting very close to wrapping up the Locust Street Park project. In regards to the Arneson Park, they're moving forward with that, with the design, with the consultant on that as well. For the is that the Arneson Park one? No, that's the azaleas. They're planting the azaleas at Arneson Park on April 22nd. which is good. We talked about the outdoor park fitness area at Legacy Park, which the city will be moving forward with that, or at least bringing it to the council. Maple Street Park. Good news is, thank you, Joe, or Scott, for moving that forward in regards to the public hearing. Getting the public involved with the input on the Maple Street Park, and more specifically the lighting. I believe that's March 20th.
Yeah. Yes, I can actually confirm that we've set the meeting. It's a public/neighborhood focus meeting, March 20th, 6 o'clock. And we will put some information out to confirm those details. I think it will be here at City Hall, but we need to confirm that. But date and time, March 20th, 6 o'clock.
Yeah, awesome, thank you. And then Auburn Farms is Harper Hoff Peterson. They have been, they're doing the design on the Auburn parks, so there will be more to come on that. Today is the first day for Arts in the Park. So they actually went out and hid the first piece of art. And so people can go online and read the clues for that and try to figure out where the art is actually hidden. So that's kind of cool that they've started that project. And you heard from Canby Kids. We did discuss that as well. We do have the agenda for the next meeting out, and so they're doing a great job with all the projects as we move forward on the project list for the comp plan. In regards to the Canby Adult Center, we did receive the cost projection, an estimate from Emmerich Construction in regards to what it is they want to do up there. And so we're going to be meeting in 2 weeks, I believe, Scott, and we'll be meeting in 2 weeks with Kathy up at the Adult Center and Jerry Nelzine staff, because it's a joint kind of ownership membership between the city and the city owns the building, but then of course the Adult Center is going to have responsibility for the remodel on the inside of the building. So they are moving forward with that. On the chamber front, just a reminder that the Chamber Gala is this weekend, and it's going to be at the Country Club. So that is happening. And then, of course, tomorrow is Good Morning Canby, and it starts at 7:30, and I don't remember where it's at. Where? King's Farm Table. Thank you. Okay, so that's happening tomorrow morning. Fire District front, we have requested the opportunity to present the levy to the council, and I've sent that to the mayor and request that be put on the agenda so that we can give the information to the council in regards to what the fire department levy is all about moving forward. That's about it.
Thank you, sir. Councilor Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Since we've met, well, actually, first, a couple of comments. Jim said, nice job on the homeless bill. And I also agree, even though I voted no, I thought that the council worked really well through all those issues. I thought that was a well-collaborated activity. I also want to thank Public Works for getting out that sand so quickly on the icy streets last week. I'm always impressed with how quickly they get out there while the rest of us hunker down. The Canby Heritage and Landmarks Commission, so I've missed some meetings here. I was home with dental surgery last time and then in conferences, but I did meet with the Heritage and Landmarks Commission at the very beginning of February. And there was a nice long meeting, a nice long presentation on their accomplishments over the last year and 5 years, which I think was primarily beneficial to me because everyone else on the committee was part of all that. And then more recently, we all received an email just today about their intent to disband. And I don't know what that means in terms of our, I think it's in our,
It's actually in our codes in a way that it actually does review. It's not just advisory, and so it would take an act by you guys to actually completely disband it. However, if there is a group resignation, then effectively they won't be able to meet until they have quorum requirements.
So I will continue to go on the first Tuesdays and sit here alone for an hour until such time as we can recruit those. So that is an interesting development.
I didn't see that email, though.
It just came out today.
I'm looking at Melissa just.
It may not have been to all of
Liaison,
us.
maybe.
I was on it and the mayor was on it, and I just assumed. I didn't read it to whom at all it was. I guess I'll try and share that to all of you guys so you can read it. And if I don't, nag me about it because I forget things, and I'm totally willing to do that. The Library Advisory Board met here in this room on the 21st of February. And there were 2 guests in the audience, which is unusual. Jessica Hines resigned as one of our Library Advisory Board members, and so we have a new posting. I think, is it posted now already? Yeah, so we have a vacancy there in the Library Advisory Board. And along that line, there's also 2 vacancies in the Friends of the Library. They're looking, no, 4 new board members they want, which is not a city committee, but which helps our library tremendously. And anyone who's interested in serving as a friend of the library, those meetings take place 9:30 in the morning on the 3rd Wednesdays across the hall here in the Willow Creek room. The library board's talking about changing its start time, but they're going to revisit that after July 1st. The LDAC meeting happened in the last month, and the Board of Commissioners is seeking budget cuts, quote, across the board, which has libraries countywide concern. I had not heard that the county's looking at cutting all of its budgets. I guess, Mr. Mayor, you could probably give us more information about that. But finally, there was an argument between some members regarding the process of culling materials from the library, which is interesting only in that in the 2+ years I've been on that, there's never been any disagreement in the Library Advisory Board. So that was new. And that concludes my report this week.
Councilor Bate, yeah, I'm not familiar with the BCC portion of the LDAC and in terms of budget cutting, so that might be more of a staff issue to kind of maybe keep an eye on to see how that's going to, or what's being discussed and how that's going to impact us in that regards. Yeah, that is a little concerning for the library district. Okay. Thank you for that. Councilor Varwick.
Thank you. So you guys might recall some of the discussion that we've had over the last few months about the Transit Advisory Committee not meeting for a long time due to the belief that they didn't have a quorum. And again, thank you to Joe for helping us learn in January that they do not need a quorum of the seats. They needed a quorum of active participants, which in January, by the way, was 2. So that meant a quorum was 1, which also didn't make for great meetings. Luckily, we had filled some seats, and we were excited to announce that the Transit Advisory Committee had planned to meet in February. Just so happens that planned meeting was last Thursday. So, therefore, the Transit Advisory Committee still has not met since last July. But they do plan to meet in March, so please pray to whoever you pray to that there will not be bad weather, or that we can do that via Zoom. Maybe we can have that set up if necessary so that advisory committee can meet. I am happy to say, though, in January we only had 2 members and 5 open seats. Now we have 6 members and 1 open seat. So please, 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 Canby community, help us fill that last seat. So I know there's people that like to serve. I'm looking out at maybe a few that might know some people to help fill that last seat. It would be great by our March meeting to have that last seat filled. So that would be awesome. Planning Commission met on Monday. They didn't transact any business. However, they did have a work session talking about policies and procedures. I believe Mr. Lindsay was there to help them go through that. So thank you for that. And then they were here just before this meeting for our joint work session. So more to come from them. And that is all I have.
Great. Thank you very much. Council President Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Most of my liaison assignments are in the first 2 weeks of the month, but I did go to the PAM meeting, which is the one of the airport meetings, and I did talk to Scott Archer already. Their question was if we were going to incorporate the airport in our comp plan planning, and I didn't have the answer to that question, so I talked to Scott and he talked to Don, and so just so my colleagues know, the airport and its benefit to Canby will be included in the discussions regarding the comp plan. Also, I am following Senate Bill 933 carefully, so it is in the transportation committee, but it is not scheduled for any hearings yet. But if it moves an iota, I will know, and I will let you all know. So I will make sure to let you know about that.
What is Senate Bill 933?
That is, our regional leaders have, and bipartisan, by the way, it is prohibiting ODOT from tolling I-205.
You brought that up earlier today.
Right. So I am following that Senate bill very closely so that if it moves out of, or moves to a hearing in the committee, we'll know that date and we can decide if we want to take a position as a board or if I'm just going to go talk to them myself as me. So I will let you know on that as I'm down there every Thursday, which is why I will not be able to attend the thing at King's Farm and Table tomorrow morning. One more note, Representative James Heeb is having his first constituent coffee here in Canby. He's going to do this throughout his whole district, but we're the first one. And it is this Friday the 3rd at Cuts Force Market from 9:30 in the morning to 11. So come out and meet and greet with our representative and bring your questions, comments, and concerns because he's ready and willing and wanting to talk with us. And that's all I have.
That's Friday, 9:30 to 11?
Yes, this Friday, 9 a.m. or 9:30 a.m., yes. Right across the street. And that's it.
Councilor Maldonado.
I do not have any liaison reports to give you guys this evening.
With March 1st.
Yeah, March 1st, we haven't met yet. However, I would like to just make a slight announcement. As we all know, Gwen's is closing on the 10th, next Friday. However, I was just informed recently that they are going to have a retirement party on March 16th, Thursday, at 4:30 p.m. at Gwen's. So everybody be out there, let them go out with a bang.
Mm-hmm.
Great. Thank you for that. Councilor Patton.
Well, I haven't had any liaison meetings, but I do have a couple of things because I love to talk. I will say that I was honored, even though it was canceled, I was honored to be included and participate in honoring our veterans at the Iwo Jima ceremony at the Canby Adult Center. I always enjoy getting a chance to thank those who have served our country and helped to secure our freedom. So I was very honored with that. We did receive. There was the snow event, and we did receive, as counselors, we did receive a comment from a citizen regarding the state of trash pickup by Canby Disposal for those areas affected. I was in the area. I am not pleased with how it was handled. And I just want to let my neighbors who have chatted with me, this constituent, and anybody out there in TV land that you are being heard, and at some point in time, the question will be raised as to the service levels that have plagued Canby Disposal. So I have squirreled that nugget away, and I will make sure that that does not die. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No. So Councilor Davis mentioned several of the parks and recreation related items. I had a couple more I wanted to note. One is that the bid for the community park improvements is going out in the next few days. So that's the restrooms and fixing some of the parking issues. So that bid will be hitting the streets very soon. So, and then, of course, that comes back to you for approval. And the other piece is, again, Councilor Davis mentioned the discussions that we're having with the team around the improvements and the maintenance at the Canby Adult Center. Also relatedly, since we've now, again, thank you, Council, for approving the lease with the school district. It gets those conversations going. We also have the swimming pool improvements that we've tabled for quite a while. And I just wanted to just get it on your radar that we're going to begin working that discussion forward again. Going to revisit what we had talked about quite some time ago with some potential improvements to mostly the lobby area, and then potentially adding a community room and some of those types of various discussions. But I'm meeting with Mr. Layton and our manager at the pool, and going to get that process kick-started again, work it up through our Parks and Rec Board for conversation and input, and then eventually come back to council. Probably would envision some kind of a work session with you to review some options and start talking about how we take that forward. So just planting that seed with you. And then the last thing I have is tomorrow is First Thursday, so 5 o'clock downtown with our downtown businesses. And that's all I've got.
Great. Thank you, sir. Next opportunity for citizen input. Gentlemen, Vicky? No more input. Action review.
You have approved the consent agenda, tabled Resolution 1381, and approved Ordinance 1594 as amended in motion to a second reading on March 15th, 2023.
Thank you, Maya. Next on our agenda is a motion to adjourn.
So I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye. Finally beat me.
Motion passes 6-0.
Yes.
Canby, we are adjourned. Thank you for tuning in. Have a great evening.
Whoa.